Hello, everybody. We are live, and today we are joined by ThoughtBat.
Hello.
Hello, ThoughtBat has a YouTube channel of his own. I really should have put the description, the link below, but I will do that after the stream is over with. But yeah, he's got a YouTube channel, same as his namesake, where he makes anarchist-related content.
Yeah, pretty much. I've not made anarchist-related content. I made a few video essays on egoism. I did a response to Hakeem, which has been my most successful video. But I think the most important video I've made is my analysis on property. It's not the most successful, but I think it's probably the most important to my political applications.
Right. All right. Well, now that you're here, now that you're in the room, metaphorically, hit me up, man. Anything you want to talk about. Politics, economics, history, philosophy, theory. The world is your wheelhouse. Hit me up.
Wow. So a lot of freedom there. So I was I was thinking of giving you the opportunity to ask me a few questions about anarchism, and then after that, I'll raise a few points about your political position as I've become more familiar to it over, since our last debate on President Sunday's channel. So, any questions? Go for it.
All right. So, I guess we'll start with some easy ones. How did you arrive at anarchism?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So, go way back when I was about 16 years old. I started off as like a liberal, typical liberal Democrat party in the UK, and I kind of just the idea of freedom just kind of rang with me. I didn't really justify it or come to any kind of deep logical conclusion about why freedom is good. I just thought it was good, and I ran with that. I then ended up going down quite a classical liberal laissez-faire capitalism phase, which lasted about 6 months. And in that phase, I was debating with other syndicalists and communists and such. And they effectively convinced me that capitalism was antithetical to the promotion of individual liberty, even the promotion of economic liberty. If we see, people describe the current state of things as a free market, but the state is, the market that we live in today is fundamentally riddled with state-secured privileges for corporate beneficiaries and things like that. So that whole oligarchical, plutocratic, microeconomic setup we have is completely antithetical to anything like a free market.
Yeah. Like, I remember, because I've known about anarcho-capitalism for roughly a decade. I first learned about it when I watched a debate between Stefan Molyneux and Peter Joseph some time ago. And I remember watching it, and it was just packed full of ideology. Just Molyneux is a very good rhetorician. He's a very good speaker. But I just remember that a lot of his answers to a lot of Peter's questions and arguments were primarily like ideologically driven. Like when he would ask things like, he's saying that the state is just a tool to accommodate the needs of the market and the capitalist class and so on. And he's basically driving that point home. And it's funny because Molyneux even admits to it, that the state exists to facilitate capitalist ends. And he says, but that's just if there's a state. If there's no state, everything's fine and dandy. So it's funny because these people kind of like narrow everything down, like blaming the government for a lot of issues that are otherwise largely intrinsic to the system itself. So ANCAP ideology, I've noticed that there's kind of like a pipeline to fascism there, because I've met a lot of ANCAPs that either go like monarchist or they'll just become like neo-Nazis, I mean,
yes, I've seen that, especially in the UK, because in the UK, the libertarian movement had very close connections with UKIP. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the UKIP party is basically Nigel Farage's old party, which he eventually left. And Sargon of Akkad is a UKIP candidate, he was a UKIP candidate for European Parliament. It seems to me, I was never an ANCAP. I flirted with the idea, but I was always convinced that I understood that there was a clash of interest between the working class and the owning class. And I was reading some of the things communists were saying, and I was thinking the state is needed to keep it falling into some kind of mob rule. I thought a constitutional state was needed to stop it from doing that. But then when I really thought about that, I'm justifying the state, I'm justifying monopoly and force, and thus justifying taxation. The whole thing just became one great big contradiction. I think the libertarians' general movement as it is today. I mean, when we say libertarian, we tend to think about the Libertarian Party in the US. I think that the way they are the way now. That doesn't make sense. The way they are now is because of McCarthyism. So back before McCarthyism, the libertarian movement was quite a radical anti-capitalist movement. You had people like Benjamin Tucker and other mutualists who are more similar to what Kevin Carson is now, or what Proudhon was back in the day. They very much emphasized with a lot of Marxist talking points. They took a lot of things from Marx, and they built their ideology around the Labour theory of value because they read that in The Wealth of Nations. The groundworks for the Labour theory of value was found in The Wealth of Nations. And then Marx obviously built on that, and Rudolf Rocker built on it as well. Proudhon added some stuff. But after McCarthyism, it seems to me that both socialist, mainstream socialist and libertarian movements have become a lot more sanitized to accommodate for capitalism. Whereas libertarians ended up saying, well, capitalism is the embodiment of a free market economy. It's not. And and mainstream socialists today, like Jeremy Corbyn and co., will say capitalism is a necessary part of creating the wealth to redistribute and raise people's quality of living.
Yeah, someone brought up the non-aggression principle, and that's why I brought up this, because you either do nothing and kill 5 people, or you pull the lever and kill 1 person but violate the NAP. So it's like one of those things that shows like how simplistic the non-aggression principle is in its framework. But in regards to what you said, with respect to the history of the libertarian movement, I don't know exactly who came along and changed it, but I know that not just Orwell's an anarchist, but in general, libertarianism as an ideology, I'm aware that it's basically another word for anarchist back in the day, but it got co-opted or appropriated by right-wingers, or really just like neocons or paleo-conservatives rather. So they basically co-opted the term, and basically that's how we ended up with modern-day libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism. And it's kind of a faux populism, honestly, because when you get down to it, what these people want is so homogenous with what neoliberalism ultimately wants. That is the privatization of the roads, the infrastructure, literally everything being transformed into a private service, because the basic rationale is that anything the public sector can do, the private sector can do better. So these people, they see the problems with the system, and they might rightly point out some contradictions, but on the other hand, they blame socialism for it, and then they want to take the rationale of neoliberalism to its logical conclusion, which is sort of like a kind of feudalism, really, when you get down to it. I mean, that's where I think we're going to be in the next few decades, is sort of feudalism, you know?
Potentially. It depends on what the left does in reaction to things like the climate crisis and whatnot. To be honest, I don't consider the right-wing libertarian movement to be any kind of threat, because, as you said before, they don't appeal to any kind of material interest, anyone's material interest. There's a reason why mega corporations don't support libertarian candidates. They support Republican or Conservative or Tory candidates, and they don't appeal to workers because their whole platform is, reverting back on workers' rights, which the working class has fought for hundreds of years. So they appeal to no one, really, apart from, as you said, an attempt at ideological purity.
Yeah, or like a low to mid-income, sort of like the middle class, small business owner. That's typically the people that are of that consciousness. I mean, I've spoken to people who are lumpen. I think that lumpen workers tend to be of a sort of a libertarian consciousness as well. And I think a lot of that stems from the kind of dog-eat-dog individualism that comes with Lumpenproletarian consciousness. So, speaking of which, let's talk a bit about the lumpen. What do you know of the Lumpenproletariat?
Absolutely nothing. I'll be honest, absolutely nothing. First time I've heard of it.
All right, so the idea is the lumpen are basically the underclass strata of capitalist society. They're basically people who are of the working class, but they're basically detached from like the legal measures by which they subsist. So they might, instead of just working a job and so on, they might live on unemployments. They might be someone on welfare, drug dealer, prostitute, someone who either is just, just a reserve, because we're at a point to where there's not really a lot of productive labor left to do, and you have all these people who are disabled or people that can't find jobs. So capitalism, just to keep these people from, dying, is basically just has reserves of these people that just live on welfare, right? Just that's what I consider it, just reserve pools of labor, just reserves of people that are just kept alive. Because otherwise, if they didn't have these in place, then, well, I mean, radical consciousness would spread overnight. So they're keeping these people on the teat, right? Dependent on the teat, so that they don't rebel against the system, more or less. Or at least that's why I think the welfare system exists. But that's the general idea. Basically, they're workers that either live on welfare, drug dealers, prostitutes. This is like the group, the main contingent group I'm talking about. People who take it one day at a time, living off the skin of their teeth, trying to survive. They're the underclass of society, if that makes any sense. People that are left behind by the system. That's generally like who the lumpen are considered. As for the role that they play, I'm sure are you familiar with what Marx had to say about the lumpen?
No, I'm not actually. Hit me up.
Yeah, all Marx really said was that they weren't worth anything and that they were just counter-revolutionary. A lot of modern Maoists, like first world Maoists, will say that the lumpen are a revolutionary demographic in themselves, but the problem is like a lot of the toxic consciousness that comes from the Lumpenproletariat, mainly the individualism, the dog psychology that a lot of them have. I'm not saying lumpen can't be comrades, but my official position is that we should sympathize with them and uplift them so that they get proletarianized. So once we bring them into the ranks of the proletariat, then they'll be cadre material. So if you've got someone who's like a drug addict, you help them get off drugs. If you have someone who lives on the streets, you help get a roof over their head. Mutual aid, my friend. Mutual aid.
Yeah, I agree, because obviously it's not the best state of living, is it? I mean,
yeah.
I wouldn't relegate all sex workers to the lumpen in that regard, but obviously, as you say, there's going to be nuances about it. But yeah, they are effectively a product of a dysfunctional system, and that system is something that both you and I wish to change. And so, those people who are interested, who have material interests in seeing their situation improved, are effectively going to be our class allies, really.
Yeah, of course. Now, this is an interesting one. What do you think of prostitution? Should it be illegal? Should it be outlawed? Should people be allowed to exchange sex or sexual favors for monetary or material gain?
I'm not opposed to it. I'm not in favor of criminalization, because to me that it's the same as a drug argument. It relegates people who are going to be interested, who are forced to becoming a sex worker into crime syndicates and people who have no interest in honest trade and things like that. It pushes them towards what I call the red market. The red market is different from the black market in so much as it effectively involves violence and extortion and exploitation, as opposed to the black market, which is like you're selling goods which have been stolen off the back of a van or shoplifted or whatever. So I think those two things are different things. I'm digressing. I'm in favor of the legalization on that. What are your views?
My stance on it is that I don't like prostitution. It is the most raw and naked form of human exploitation that there is. And there is good reason why socialists, communists throughout the millennia, more like throughout the last couple centuries, have been vehemently against it, and why in many historically existing socialist projects they've outlawed it for good reason. I don't think it should be outlawed, however, but it's mainly for the reasons you bring up, that I don't think prohibition is a very effective way of tackling a social problem. I think a better way to handle it would be provide people with the economic opportunity so that they don't feel compelled to do it in the first place. But it should be decriminalized. It shouldn't be encouraged, but decriminalized. That way, if someone's like being sex trafficked, or if someone's, in that situation, they'll be able to go to the police, and they'll be able to go to the government and let them know, I'm a victim of sex trafficking. I need out. Like, help me out. And they won't have to worry about being punished, basically.
Yeah.
That's kind of my stance.
Because sex workers aren't a monolith of people who have the same material conditions surrounding them. Because some of the people I know who are in that business, who I met on my course, my teacher training course, not my teacher training, but the course that came before that. Sorry, and they had a student loan. They were living in student accommodation. They had pretty much the same life as I did, but they saw OnlyFans as a way of making another £40-50 a week, just to buy some more beers at the weekend. So, I don't think we'd say that's a terrible result for that person. I'd probably say it's a better result, really. There could be a psychological analysis done into the maybe the mental health impacts of prostitution. Yeah. Maybe there's some things to be found out about it. They probably already exist. I haven't read them.
Yeah. Under a socialist system, I think that prostitution should constitute a social ill that public officials should be doing programs to actively eliminate, not through through direct coercion so much as just like economic and political policy to tackle the problem, like community awareness programs, shelters for victims of abuse. And I think the abolition of money and the establishment of like as I've called it, a labor voucher based system, or a labor credit system, you could, at the very least, you could basically make prostitution impossible. I mean, I suppose people could still trade sex for like favors and so on, but such a relationship is much less exploitative than if they were just exchanging for cold hard cash,
Yeah, I think what was I going to say? I've got 2 points. In Britain, we had a problem with the criminalization of brothels, and they define a brothel as a building with more than one sex worker in it. But the problem with that is sex workers typically have another person with them for safety reasons. So if you ban brothels, then with that definition rather, then you've effectively criminalized having another person who's in on it, not in the room with you, but nearby, close by, in the same building, for your own protection. So there's problems with that. And the other point was, what philosophical difference is there between selling your body for sex and selling your body for productive purposes?
Selling your body for sex and reproductive purposes,
and for the difference between that and selling your body for productive purposes. So, for example, just working in a factory, you're renting your hands to manipulate resources. Manipulate materials into commodities. What's the major difference?
I would say the major difference, or why I think the case of prostitution is even worse, is, there's selling your time and your labor, and then there's selling your body. It's just it's such a more direct way. Like you're literally selling your own flesh and blood for money. And I feel like maybe morally or ethically it isn't really worse, but I think on some visceral level, I suppose I just take more pause with it. I wouldn't, because I feel like there's layers of this. I wouldn't exactly equate work in the corner with working at a Starbucks, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, so and I understand that. So it's about the intimacy and how close your body is to the other person. So how about a massage parlor?
Yeah,
a spa.
Massage parlor. I mean, I suppose it's not as bad as long as you tell them to hold the blowjob.
I mean, what I'm referring to is it is a body-to-body contact, and you're still delivering a service to that person. They're feeling good as a result of it. I think it effectively derives from our value for that romantic intimacy of sexual interactions. I think that's where it comes from.
Well, the thing is that sexual, it's so much more close and like personal than if you're giving someone a massage or you're working behind a cash register. I mean, you are either literally inside someone else or they're inside of you when you're having sexual intercourse. And, you know, there's a lot more implications that go with that than if someone's laboring for you. I mean, you've got STTs, you've got pregnancy, but, you know, of course, contraception. But I think maybe there's something else that's very like hardwired in like humans to see sex much differently from the way we would see other activities. And it's largely because, you know, women are incapacitated for like 6 to 9 months after they get pregnant, you know? So this is an interesting point. Massage has healing properties that have nothing to do with sex.
I wasn't saying massaging has direct linkages to like sexual interactions. What I would say, if we talk about STIs and stuff, there are some jobs which involve the risk of contracting diseases, like working in the mines. You can get different kinds of poisoning. Working in nuclear power plants have come with risks of radioactive poisoning, etc. Which are also workplace injuries can put you out of work for months on end. Death, even workplace death, is more common than death in the military at the moment. So it's because really, are we being materialists when we talk about the personal intimacy, the romantic connections, and this, that, and the other, or are we being quite ideological about it?
Yeah, I don't know. The sex debate in leftist circles has been going on for a very long time. I'm not too well read on the subject. A lot of Marxist feminists I'm aware of historically are rather sex negative. I lean a little more towards the sex positive side. It's really just because there's just a very massive unequal exchange and with respect to like prostitution, because people don't sell their bodies for sport. They don't do it for fun, typically, anyways. You know, I'm sure there's some people that enjoy having sex as a career, but I'm just saying the majority of people that go into it are not going into it for fun. They're going into it because they've got nowhere else to go for the most part. And like you mentioned, there's like college kids who will perform sexual acts on camera so they can pay their bills because whatever the hell jobs they have aren't paying enough. So, I mean, people are going to do what they got to do to get by. But I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on the subject, but I do want to move on.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I'm no expert on this at all. I've had the conversations about it before, but those are just my immediate thoughts.
Yeah. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and bust out a little bit tougher questions then. So I guess give me a general rundown of what your model, like anarchist society, let's say, I don't know, Great Britain has an anarchist revolution, right? Has its
Anarcho-Britannia.
Anarcho-Britannia, yes.
Yep.
You've got the red and the black British flag. Hold on, what's the British flag looks like now?
The Union Jack in it is the crosses on top of each other.
Right.
The Welsh flag is excluded from it because they don't like the Welsh. I'm also Welsh and I'm very sad about it.
So
I'm not an anarchist. I'm going to take on the stream.
Wait, someone came on the stream? I was just going to do this. So while you're explaining, I'm going to be having some fun, but I'm listening. Go ahead and explain give me a general rundown of what your model, Anarcho-Britain, looks like.
Okay, cool. So before I start, I need to emphasize that because I'm effectively advocating a free society where people operate through voluntary interactions and they decide things for themselves, I can't give a exact manifesto for how things can be implemented. I think that's generally quite a problem with anarchists and how they
All
how
right.
they
Well,
explain the views.
I got an even better question in them. You have your revolution, assuming there's no civil war, there's no times of siege, like the rest of the capitalist world doesn't fuck with you. Let's assume some other countries have revolutions too. So, I know it depends on the conditions, but I guess what I'd like to ask is, what would a transition to an anarchist society based on mutual aid and exchange and benefit and free association look like?
What would it look like? It would look like something like Christiania at the moment, where they effectively have worker cooperatives within their territory. They have workplace democracy. They have locally elected councils, possibly a polycentric legal order. We can go into that a bit later. But the thing is, when we talk about like the country transitioning from where we are now into a more anarchist society, we actually have a very different means of doing it from that which Marx talked about. So in the Communist Manifesto, Marx explicitly stated, and Marx and Engels specifically stated, that the siege of the state is going to be the first step of the proletariat revolution. Now, I was reading Exodus by Kevin Carson, and he stressed that if we look at the transition from feudalism to the bourgeois society, the seizure of the state was one of the last things they did. So the French Revolution, the bourgeoisie were already developing their system within the shell of the old system before the seizing of the state. So capitalism was already pretty much in full swing prior to the late 1700s. So what I'm suggesting is a kind of counterpower, gradualism, if you like. So effectively this means supporting movements to expand the cooperative sector, supporting unionization efforts, supporting mutual aid networks, also deterritorializing various kinds of associations. So I'm losing my words, but in terms of like getting things done, in terms of mutual aid networks, we can do them through the internet and just distribute finances. We can help redistribute wealth via oh god, what are they called? By virtual societies, I should say. That's it.
Gotcha.
And
so
those kinds of things are happening now.
So this is such a broad one, but so I guess some immediate short-term goals would. So before the revolution, you build your unions up, your mass organizations, your cooperatives, and so on, and then you have it. And so, what are you left with after the revolution? So you're talking about directly smashing the state, right? Or
Yeah.
is there some sort of transition not state of some kind? So what the goal would be is you would just have like some sort of not state, but like the goal would be to flatten hierarchy and influence over time, right? Or
Yeah, the goal is to reshape the economy in line with usufruct property norms.
all right.
So as long as you use an object, then you are justified in owning it. And I can give you the justification for usufruct property rights if you want me to go into that. But effectively, my justification doesn't scale up to the system that we have now, where owners of capital have nothing to do with the capital which they own, and they're just effectively used and managed by employees. So the transition away from absentee ownership to usufruct ownership is, that is the path I'm talking about.
All right. So from absentee ownership to user ownership. So this effectively what you're talking about is means of production, fertile land, soil, homes, just whatever's located around the people at present basically becomes their collective property, right?
Yeah, effectively, yeah. And there's multiple ways society can function around this. It's dependent on how the people who own their usufruct property decide to associate with the community. They could redistribute their resources and put them into like a local stockpile like an anarcho-communist society. That's been done, and that is being done in some places. Or you can be more of a mutualist. I call myself a mutualist, and trade it through a cooperative economy, similar to the one that I was talking about with you in our debate.
Gotcha. So I guess we'll introduce some material conditions in your project. All right. Britain has its it has its revolution. I don't know. Let's say it happens. We'll give you some more territory. Want to have you Western Europe? We'll give you Western Europe. That sound good?
Okay.
All right.
That sounds perfect, actually.
Yeah.
Because that is the goal of European syndicalists, to capture Western. Well, there's a strip in Western Europe from the Rhineland and such. But yeah, go.
You have everyone except Portugal, because I say so. And so now you got to deal with the United States, in the sense that America has a bunch of military bases across Western Europe. And I'm assuming there would be like a war, of course, like America. I don't think that we would get any like Napoleonic, like, beach invasions. But I mean, under such conditions, America would definitely try to encircle. The capitalist world would definitely try to encircle such a project. I don't necessarily think like Africa, but I could see China doing it, and I could see America and like maybe a few other countries that all have investment in Europe, or they have military bases. I mean, you guys take control of the bases, you got weapons and armaments. So if you're in such cases, like, I'm assuming you would start doing a lot of self-management and self-production at home with respect to resource distribution and like production and so on, because if you're being sanctioned, you're going to be limited on what you can have.
Yeah, the fact that you've given me Western Europe is quite an advantage, because syndicalists have identified Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, Alsace-Lorraine, and the Rhinelands as being enough enough of an industrial center to be able to produce all we need without becoming reliant on the United States. So US imperialism will become less effective if we have control over those areas.
So you would have an easier time holding out, you think? I'm sure
in case of an economic warfare, I think holding those areas would be advantageous.
All right. So here's where a couple tougher ones are going to come in. So without like a central authority acting with any sort of broad oversight, assuming everything's just decentral and everything's organized into your federations, right? Federation, the right word for it?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, all right, sure. So, what are some pressures, like, or what are some ways you would prevent, like, I'd say certain federations or certain communes and so on, that basically they start charging rent. They might start charging rents for an essential resource that is just unique to their area, and they found that they could enrich themselves if they just speculate and charge extra for, I don't know, all the potassium. They've got a potassium mine, and you guys really need potassium. So, but they're charging that extra top dollar for potassium. What would you do about that?
What would I do about that?
Yeah, like I guess the other communes, would the communes just encircle the commune that's like starting shit or causing trouble with the rest of the group?
Well, I mean, I think if that commune which owns the potassium is just holding it, they're refusing to sell it effectively.
Well, no, they're selling it. Like, the idea is that they're selling it, but they're selling it way above market prices with like the deliberate attempts to take advantage of their neighbors. Like, what would you do about something like that?
Is it controlled by the individual workplaces workforces that operate that?
Well,
produce potassium?
it would be the collective owners of the mine. They all came to the collective decision and they talked it out with their buddies and neighbors. Like,
Okay.
Why don't we just charge extra for the potassium? Everyone's forced to pay. So and they decide to do something like that. I mean, is there like are you going to get like a collective arbitrators? Is there going to be like a court, or I mean, are you just going to let them make everyone go broke over potassium?
Well, if they're going broke, they won't be able to afford the potassium. So I don't see how the market would even function with potassium in that instance. If they're outpricing their consumers, then they wouldn't be able to sell it. So I'm a bit confused how the monopoly comes, how this situation would even arise if we're operating within a mutualistic economy. It's very much dependent. It's very much dependent on one workplace having access to the entire potassium, the entire source of potassium in the continent.
Well, the potassium is just an example. You could swap it out for coal, lithium, wheat, something like. The point is that you have a scarce resource native to a given region. It might not be the only source, but it is a scarce resource, and they're one of the sources. So the whole point of the question is that within the context of a market economy, if you've got something that everyone needs and there's no other show in town, then you're going to be incentivized to raise the prices to make more money off of it, basically. And this is going to come at the expense of your neighbors. So I was just wondering, like, how exactly you would, under such a circumstance, deal with something like that. I'm trying not to make this a loaded question. Like,
yeah, I understand. Yeah, so it's fair enough. So if you said if it's going to come at the expense of your neighbors, so I'm assuming it's an essential resource. So effectively, they won't be able to live.
A price inelastic good. That's what I'm talking about. Like, how would you deal with price inelastic goods? Because here in America, all of our price inelastic goods are managed by private services, and as a result, the market equilibrium price is above and beyond what most people would be able to afford baseline. So that's the reason why healthcare is so expensive. And despite the fact that it's so expensive, it's more profitable to charge more, even if it leaves like tens of millions of people out to dry, is my point. So I don't know, like, if you don't have like any sort of government or oversight to like introduce regulations or price controls, or you don't have a way to negotiate or, dare I say, threaten them to stop charging too much for this inelastic good. I mean, would the neighboring communes just like, I don't know, steal the patent to it or try to distribute their own version of it? Would like local markets try to like, I don't know, make substitutes? Like, what exactly would be done in the wake of that?
So I think I understand the question now. So in terms of how resources are, how land and etc. is redistributed, and the whole justification for usufruct property is effectively an appeal to mutuality. So as long as it is mutually beneficial to uphold certain rights, then those rights will be upheld. Like, for example, the right to life. I am coming back to this. So in the context of a monopoly or a natural monopoly, I do actually advocate for either consumer ownership or common ownership. So, for example, the water supply, which I think is a more obvious example of a natural monopoly. If a cooperative if a private cooperative owned that water supply, then they'd be able to charge whatever the hell they wanted. Across a specific region, the consumers have no choice but to pay them that money. So in that case, I would say it is then justified to expropriate the workers' ownership of that monopolized resource and distribute that ownership to the consumer.
So expropriation. So it's the majority imposing its will on the minority. We're like, yo, we ain't paying this top dollar for this motherfucking potassium, dog. So, you're going to start charging us less, or we're just going to take it from you.
Yeah, because you're talking about a labor aristocracy, aren't you?
Yeah.
So
No.
in such an instance, if you have a labor aristocracy, then you don't really have an anarchy, do you?
Yeah. You know, you provided me with a much better answer than some of the answers I've heard from ANCAPs on such a subject. So we'll leave it at that. But I got a couple other good ones. I mean, this is a question I posed during the debate, but I was asking you how you would maintain full employment, or if that would even be a goal. I interjected that the reason why I want full employment is because people need stuff to do, and at least until we get productive enough to where we can distribute according to need, then people are going to need to do some degree of work, and there's going to need to be some sort of incentive to send people to do labor and civilization, basically, and remuneration according to work. But within a cooperative market economy, as I pointed to with the Yugoslav example, and I mean, I'm sure you've had plenty of time to think of an answer to this, but it's been shown that, at least with the example of Yugoslav, that they were not able to guarantee full employment, and unemployment was a growing problem. So within the context of your ideal cooperative market economy, how would you circumvent such a thing?
So I don't set full employment as a goal. Okay. But to answer the Yugoslavia question, in Yugoslavia, they didn't actually have worker ownership. They still had state ownership. The companies were still propped up by the state. A group of workers couldn't take a loan from the bank and set up their own cooperative. It had to be at the expense of the state. But you did have something called you did have worker self-management, and that part of that management was employment. So it is true that in those areas there was no incentive for them to expand their workplaces because that would effectively lead to a reduction of their share in the pie. But there was no opportunity for any other company or any other cooperative to see a gap in the market and set itself up. So that's a problem when using Yugoslavia as a comparison to like an anarchist mutualist economy sort of thing, because it wasn't worker ownership. It was worker management, yeah, true, but it wasn't. Production wasn't really owned by the workers. I'm repeating myself.
Okay.
So I was watching. You probably hate this guy, Richard Wolff.
I don't hate Wolff. I like Wolff.
No? I thought MLs didn't like him.
No. The ML critique of Wolff is that we don't like his fetishization of co-ops. Like, he overemphasizes the importance and role of co-ops in the broader movements, and because of that, it kind of paints a distorted image of what we believe the ultimate goal should be. Otherwise, I like Wolff. I think he's a great introduction to leftism in general. Just personally, I think he has his limits. That's all.
That's interesting, because anarchists have the exact same criticism. He effectively upholds the cooperative society as his penultimate goal, well, his ultimate goal, and it's not even my goal. I talk about markets because I think markets will fill in roles which will help a perhaps planned economy. Fill in some areas where it might be dysfunctional, but we can come back to that because I want to address the actual question. Yeah. So Richard Wolff points out the difference between cooperatives and Yugoslavian social enterprises, and that was literally that. So in a capitalist company, you have managers and you have directors. The managers are hired by the directors, so it's like a director-managed economy sort of thing. Whereas in Yugoslavia, what you had was social enterprise, where the state owned the thing, but the workers hired the managers because they were the best leaders, perhaps in the role. They more quickly addressed some problems which weren't being addressed by the central government, etc., etc. But it wasn't that kind of thing. So one of the ways the reluctance to hire more workers could be dealt with would be the possibility for workers to set up new cooperatives to fill in gaps in the market. Now, the reason I'm not entirely on board with the full employment idea, one, I think you need to have a job market, and to have a job market, you need to have people who are. Well, you need to have jobs which are available, and you need to have labour which is free flowing. So you need to have a pool of people who are between jobs, between work. So the existence of that is contradictory to full employment. So, for example, I'm having problems right now trying to find my first job as a teacher because of COVID. Teachers aren't leaving their posts; they're not doing anything. It's only the retirees who are leaving gaps open in the labour pool, so in the job market. So there's not many jobs available. But also, I think companies themselves need to be able to have a labour market, so from which they can analyse candidates and say, I think this person is going to fit in with us, or this person is going to fit in with us, just for freedom of association purposes. But obviously, I'm not going to ignore there's problems with unemployment, obviously. So I think those things can be alleviated through general mutual aid. Because, for example, I mentioned in the debate a local area where there's poverty, because that's a problem, isn't it? Employment causes poverty, which is the problem. Those cooperatives are going to want to invest in mutual aid services, which generally raise the quality of living of their community, which reduces crime, it reduces it boosts happiness in general. People like having happy neighbours, and we see this with cooperatives today. Cooperatives are far more likely to invest in community services.
Oh, is that it?
Did I not answer the question?
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine. Like I said, I'm not looking to press you too hard just because you said you wanted to ask me some questions, so I wanted to go ahead and...
Yeah, you can press me as hard as you can. I mean, because obviously I want to make sure that you and your audience can get the best.
Yeah, no, I understand, and it was a pretty similar answer to what you gave during the debate with respect. So basically that... I mean, what would there be like a mutual bank that would give new cooperatives an opportunity to start up, basically? Is that how you would start new cooperatives? Because you said that the answer would be to allow people to start co-ops at will, and that through welfare and like the social safety net, like unemployment, it won't be too much of a concern. So people that can't find work will be taken care of through the social safety net by the economy, effectively. All right. So, but about I was asking about the co-op startup thing. So, would there be like a mutual bank? How would that work? Or would people?
So mutual banking. So mutual banks, mutual credit unions. Sorry, credit unions already exist today, and they're effectively owned by their members. So they give out loans and they charge a minimum interest fee. a minimal interest fee, which covers admin stuff, and it goes and the rest of it goes towards a reserve, so they can loan out more loans effectively to new members. The difference between this and a regular bank is that the interest isn't being siphoned off just to the back pocket of either. My friend talked to me about banks which are owned by their employees, which I'm actually opposed to, because I think that's going to be the employees just siphoning off interest rates, not for reuse by the reserve, but just for their own by their own monetary gain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. I'm sorry, I was starting to space out a bit. I apologize. But no, I got a general idea of what you're talking about, just mutual banking and so on.
Yeah, so that's how that works.
Yeah, all right.
And they exist today, and they're quite popular in America, I believe.
Would economic planning ever be introduced into your system?
Yeah, I'm no opponent of economic planning, just so long as it's done by a voluntary association. So, for example, I don't call myself an opponent of ANCOMs because I think ANCOMs are my political allies. It's just that ANCOMs themselves acknowledge that voluntary association is necessary for their thing to be valid. So if a group of people come together and say, hey, let's have a stockpile and let's freely distribute it That's fine. I've got no problem with that. But I think there's limitations to that model, and so those limitations will be filled in by market forces. I think that can only work for communities which are like about 100 people strong. In Christiania, which is a place I've been to, it's technically on paper an anarcho-communist society, but it's not. If you go there, they still have markets, they still have currency, they still have effectively, they're still making things and selling them to buy luxury goods. They have housing guaranteed to them, but because obviously land's decommodified. But markets still function.
So here's a statement. This is an interesting one. As a disabled person, I think anything less than full employment is theft upon the least of the people. I mean, I don't know exactly what he means by that, but okay.
I don't know what he means either.
Yeah, no.
All due respect, could you ask him or them to clarify?
Yeah. Could you clarify this statement, buddy? Appreciate that. So, all right. Let me think if I've got anything else. I apologize. I didn't really write down any questions in advance, and I mean, you made a video addressing some of what I had to say.
Have you watched it?
Yeah. So, yeah, Bat made a video because addressing a series of questions that I've posed at the start of our last debate. If you guys like to check it out, and I did watch it. I'd have to go through it again because I was going to do like a rebuttal or response. I probably will make like a written video about it at some point, but I got to get through making videos about people that I don't like before I start making, like, I guess, friendly responses to people. Yours would be a friendly response, sort of like the friendly response I made to Jason one time. But most people I make videos about are people I generally do not like, or people that I just have criticisms of. My most recent video, man. Actually, I'll get into that after we're done talking about this.
Yeah. After we've gone through this, I'll crack some beers open and we'll just have a friendly chat about it.
No, I was wondering if you had questions for me.
Yeah, I've got some. So obviously, I know what Marxist-Leninism is. I've read quite a bit of Lenin. I've read State and Revolution. I've read Imperialism, Highest Form of Capitalism, and I've read Infantile Disorder. And I've not read as much Marx as I should have done, or should have done by now. But effectively, so I've got some stuff written down. So what have I said? I've said vanguardism relies on ideological purity throughout the party, and so the whole concept of a vanguard party is you need to have a group of people who are going to put out a rigorous platform for which the country is going to follow.
Yeah.
So this is going to require a certain degree of ideological purity. And this means that worker access to political power must be restricted. Otherwise, we'll see some heavy or severe party splits. It seems to me that these vanguardist movements end up disagreeing on how the society should be taken forward. And so we've seen in Britain especially, these communist groups having an argument over what should be done and then just splitting. I don't know if this is a problem in America.
Are you asking like how to prevent splits? Because
no, not quite. Because I know how splits are prevented when these parties come to power. So when these parties are in power, they typically go through purges. They keep people out of their movement to enforce its ideological purity. So my question is, how does this reconcile with the general idea of a dictatorship of the proletariat as a general rule?
Well, how does this reconcile the dictatorship of the proletariat? The absolute, you mean the absolute rule of the working class, or so I guess I would say I'm trying to narrow it down. Are you trying to suggest that party bureaucracy or leadership might have interests separate from the workers?
I do, but that's not what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
I do believe that, but that's not my point.
Yeah, because I don't necessarily think ideological purity is the word that I would use to describe. I would say more like scientific commitment to the construction of socialism. So, how familiar are you with democratic centralism?
I got a general gist of it.
All right, so let's go ahead. I'll go through it for you real quick. I can tell you in about a sentence. Democratic centralism is the idea that you have your party, and over issues you have open debate over them, and it's a period where everyone and anyone can voice their mind or speak their mind and so on, present their cases, and there's like rigorous debate over this issue for a period of time. But eventually what happens is that once the party has reached a consensus on an issue, or the majority have reached a consensus on a position, then from that point on, debate is over with, and the party will now have created a platform around what the majority have decided, and that platform will be executed, and then that's it. So basically, the point is everyone has their voice, everyone has their say, and once the majority has come to a position on something, then that's it. The debate's over. The rule is going to be enforced.
Okay.
But the whole point is that I mean, it's both democratic, but it's also dictatorial at the same time. Is the general idea, because in the Marxist world outlook, dictatorship and democracy are not mutually exclusive.
So, who attends these debates?
I mean, everyone in the party. Like, if it's decisions being made within the central committee, then everyone within the central committee. If it's within like a given regional council on a given issue, then it's everyone within that council.
Okay.
I think that you know, never mind. What were you going to say?
So, if it's party members who are the ones debating and voting on these issues, I assume party executives of some form, or it could even be decided by the party members themselves, people can be ejected from the party, surely.
Yeah, people can be rejected by the party.
Okay, so yeah, because we don't want fascists being in the Communist Party. So it's not.
Well, hold on. I know where you're going with this, and I know what you're talking about. Historically, the Soviets had single-party elections and single-party candidates where you could either vote or reject a person for a given position, and they were also recallable from below, so they could be recalled and held to account by the people that they were appointed by. And I do want to say that I am in favor of multi-party or multi-individual or multi-candidate elections, or at least that's what they were trying to do, but the policy never got passed. But you were saying?
So yeah, well, I think multi-party elections contradict the idea of vanguardism?
No, not multi-party, but multi-candidate elections. And no, not necessarily. Believe it or not, Stalin actually tried to reform the Communist Party to make it so, to where there were multiple candidates for a position at a time, and that you can choose from a pool of candidates instead of having one person that's either voted or rejected by the group. And some people actually voiced against it. They said something along the lines of, if we have these multi-candidate elections, then what if, right-wingers or reactionaries manage to become one of the multiple people? And Stalin said that, if we're losing elections, if we're failing elections against right-wingers and reactionaries, then in a sense we deserve to fail. Stalin was never able to get the multi-candidate reform passed. There were a lot of democratic reforms that he fought for while he was alive, but some of them he was able to get passed, most things he was not. So if your criticism is that there's not enough democracy and it's too bureaucratized, then believe it or not, Uncle Joe himself would agree with you.
Yeah, fair enough. So, but I'm still trying to think, because the party has the power to eject people based on ideological differences. and they also have the power to nominate candidates, even in a multi-candidate system. The candidates themselves are selected by the party, are they?
Well, the candidates are not chosen by the party directly. They're chosen by their local and regional Soviets. So you have the council, and the group basically decides who they want for this position. They draft a vote, and they can either vote to pass or reject this person, or recall them at a later time. And then that person is appointed to this position. It is true that the Communist Party in the USSR did have the power to reject candidates at times, but this is in general how their political process worked. Being ML does not necessarily mean that you want to recreate the political organization of the USSR verbatim. It had a lot of problems, and it was, in my opinion, too top down. So I am in favor of a one-party system, but I'm in favor of a different kind of democracy from the way it was organized in the USSR.
Yeah. So I suppose my question is more about, so say we have something in the US or in the UK. Mm-hmm. We have the Communist Party of the USA. Maybe not who they are right now, but the representatives of it, right, controlling the thing, and they have a ideological falling out on the same level as Stalin and Trotsky. I'm not talking about assassination, but I'm just talking about an ideological falling out to the point where big leaders in the party were ejected for ideological differences. Would candidates be able to? Well, what would stop that party from excluding candidates who are running on similar platforms to the recently ejected leader?
Are you talking about? I'm trying to understand your question. So, like, you mean like someone like a Trotsky coming along, and then there's a falling out? What would stop more people coming along? Well, I'll tell you what the Soviets did. They just basically banned people from that ideological bloc, more or less. They just had a bunch of them removed.
So that's my problem. So, but would you be in favor of the Communist Party banning candidates from
banning candidates? Well,
banning Trotsky's candidates, for example.
Banning Trotsky
or Pogonist candidists.
Pogonist candidates. Well, if it's a Pogonist, then yeah, I'm honestly cool with that. But in general, I don't. What they did wasn't exactly out of line with the principles of democratic centralism, though. So I think fundamentally, what we need to get to the root of is our critiques of democratic centralism, because I mean, Trotsky lost out in the political arena pretty damn hard. I mean, like, sweeping majority was in the favor of Stalin and his camp. So that's how Trotsky and his group ended up getting rejected. And in all honesty, like, I mean, ideally you wouldn't have like political falling outs like this. We'd hopefully be able to create a situation where we're able to reach compromises on things. But if you have people that are just like opportunists, or people that, you know, have they're only in it for themselves, or like are potentially corrupt, basically, then you need some way to remove corrupt or reactionary or counter-revolutionary elements within the party. And that's, you know, the reason why they had such tight discipline. But like I said, under my model, ideally I wouldn't leave it to the party itself to decide who needs to get purged. I have a different vision, something that you might actually appreciate. So you would have like a group of auditors, right? You would have like an entity or organization separate from the government, and their job is basically just to root out foul play and corruption. And these people that are part of this auditor group, you know, they're chosen from the citizenry at random. So they're chosen to their position directly from the citizenry. And so their job would just be to root out corruption. And rather than leave it directly to the party leadership themselves, I think there should be like an auditing group that like checks for foul play, you know? I don't know what you think of that.
I think you mentioned I think you mentioned that kind of model in the debate, and I have
Yeah.
I've got some questions about that one as well.
Yeah.
So, one of I understand that it's not necessarily meant to be a fully democratic entity. So, my not democratic criticism is we can ignore that. I'll go into the next one. So, what if the randomly selected candidates are reactionaries themselves?
Oh, well, that is an excellent question. Remember when I mentioned those auditors?
Yeah, those auditors who are selected.
If the auditors are reactionary, that is an excellent question. I mean, everybody in like administrative positions, I think the main goal should be to make it so that the levers of power, or the people who wield the levers of power, is to remove the whole imposition of having power over other people and instead turn it into something to where it's just another job, like driving a truck or building something, or I don't know, managing a cash register. The point is, we need to remove the incentive to be corrupt in the first place. And that's the reason why I'm such a big proponent of sortition democracy. So yeah, it is possible that reactionaries like do take power. But on top of being less likely, the other point is like, if the system's actually democratic enough, then we could potentially end up in a position like, you in the potassium kulaks, where you said like neighboring communes could just depose or expropriate. You could end up in a similar position like this. Like if the majority are socialist and someone's like gets put to this position like, yo, let's restore capitalism, that's going to cause a lot of pause with all of their neighbors, don't you think? So
it would do.
Yeah, and of course this behavior should be encouraged as well, or that people are open about their ideas and beliefs. No censorship, because it's much easier to spot opportunists and reactionaries when they're open about their opportunism and their reaction,
Yeah. So would you say that they can be recalled following like a vote of no confidence?
Yeah, I mean, recallability should definitely be a thing.
For the auditors?
But for the auditors themselves, and really just the political apparatus. So I don't think sortition should be applied to literally everything, but I do think recallability is an important thing. Like I think for local and like local elections where people are choosing like their sheriffs and their deputies, I think that people should have the right to vote on like their bosses, vote on their like managers, as well as like the police and so on.
Yeah.
But for,
I suppose my next question would be, if auditors can be recalled from a vote of no confidence.
Yeah.
So what were the points in sortition in the first place if the majority can just recall them if you don't like them?
Well, the point is that they can be recalled. It would have to be something akin to impeachments. You would have to be able to. There would have to be, I'm assuming, some sort of legal process, like if this person is guilty or something, or watch. But it wouldn't even be the auditors that are exercising power. It would be the people within the party and like the various ministries of like labor and energy and so on. So the auditors themselves don't have any power. Like their job is just to check to make sure that people in governmental positions aren't abusing their power. Does that make sense?
Well, they would have power, wouldn't they? Because if they are the arbitrators of whether or not government legislators are abusing their power, and they have the power to relieve them of their from office, then they do have power, don't they?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't really
almost absolute power by virtue of a sortition.
I mean, yeah, but I'm just trying to figure out what the incentive for it would be. I mean,
it could be ideological. Not necessarily materialistic, but ideological. Like they could just be they could just be Vosh. Vosh could be there, and
oh yeah.
I'm saying it for comedic purposes, obviously, but it could purely be ideological. I just feel like some of these potential problems could be bypassed through a far more anarchistic model. Like Chris Daney doesn't have these problems. Neither did the CNT, neither did Ukraine, neither does Puerto Real and Cadiz. neither do visitors. So I'm effectively saying I'm making an appeal to efficiency effectively. So what have I said here? I've said central planning creates a clash of interest between planners and the on-field workers. The workers have their own incomes and lives to consider, while the planners are more focused on maximizing worker outputs to suit goals which are often disconnected from the workers themselves. Hence, clashes between public sector unions and the state. So this is my next point. Unlike strikes from private sector unions, which seek to dent capitalist profit, public sector unions attempt to delegitimize the state or the popularity of the state. If the vanguard party fails to satisfy trade unions, which is possible, it must choose between risking opposition parties, including reactionary ones, becoming more popular and wresting power away from them, or tighten its grip on industrial action and restrict the political strength of workers even more than before. So now, obviously, my system of like direct worker ownership kind of removes the need for unions, other than, I guess, in cases where it's consumer owned. If a consumer owned co-op would need a union, I'd say. But if the majority of production is run through worker cooperatives,
I want to throw something else in as well. This is actually a good point, and I was meaning to bring this up, but basically, not just anyone would be appointed to their positions in my model. You would have to be qualified. Just a heads up, so it would be from pool of qualified candidates. It wouldn't just be from the people who get qualified are from the general public. They would apply to get trained for it, but the point is you train as many people as possible, and then from this pool of just trained people, that one of them at random gets chosen, they serve a term, and then it's the next person's turn is the general idea. The point is that if the people who are elected these positions of power and authority are working class people, they're directly from the same class of people, there's going to be a general propensity for them to have their material interests in line with the rest of the working class is the idea. As for people that are striking, I mean, if a communist party or a communist country is doing such a piss poor job at addressing the needs of its people to the point to where you have most of the government striking against it, then that's on a failure of the government, to be honest.
It doesn't need to be a failure of the government because, as I said before, union interests can often differ from the interests of the wider community. So, for example, the example I often bring up is not necessarily to Marxist-Leninists, but to Labour supporters. So, before the Thatcher years, Labour was having some difficulties in satisfying the demands of unions. The unions were effectively striking because of pay. Labour was saying, well, we can't afford this. We need to allocate resources to X, Y, and Z. We can't invest in this. And the unions were saying, well, no, we're living on poverty wages. Give us more salaries, etc. So we could possibly say the state is objectively correct in this situation.
Yeah, the state could be correct, but then the workers in a group. Yeah, in such instances, I mean, unfortunately, you could compromise to the extent that you could compromise, but if there's just a group of people that you can't make happy, then I mean, if you're not able to address what they want, then you're basically going to have to tell them to wait until we have this problem solved. But otherwise, if they start to protest and start to strike, I mean, they have the freedom to do that, but I don't know.
But the problem I raised to Labour supporters, I know you're not Labour supporters, but I'll say you need to sacrifice maybe one or the other. So you have to sacrifice the efficiency of your economy, or if say teachers are constantly striking, which is one of the problems during the winter of discontent, the electorate get pissed off with the government. And they'll end up. This is why Thatcher became so popular, because she put in a load of anti-union laws, which effectively restricted union action. Had all of its negative consequences that came with that. But the electorate were just happy with seeing the schools back open, or the trains working again, or the miners back to work, and all the rest of it. So there's these classes of interests in general. Whichever side's right, the union could be right, the state could be right. I think this clash of interest is solved through direct worker ownership of their workplaces.
All right. But then you run into the problems with that as well. Like if you have no, like guiding, if you don't have a helmsman like guiding the ship, if you don't like have any sort of like centralized government of some kind or organization of some kind, then you could equally run into the exact same issue as well, you know, like within a highly decentralized context. But like for example, like with the whole market economy where we talk about how cooperatives would basically be incentivized to pocket the earnings and the value that they create, and they would have less incentive to reinvest or basically hire other people, or you know, some might find that operating their commune or community within capitalist relations might be better off, you know. So what I'm trying to say is like you could have the exact thing happening in your system, and I mean, unless everyone, all their neighboring communes and people just hop in to stop it, like then you're gonna have the same problem. And if they do hop in to stop it, then how is that much different from a central government doing the same thing, you know?
So two things. So again, with the idea that cooperatives have incentives to pocket investment and not expand. If you're not investing in a company, then you're not going to be as competitive. As the same with refusing to hire workers. Cooperatives which are happy to take minor losses or let's say short-term losses and hire more workers are effectively more productive and have a better competitive edge in the market. If you're saying, oh, we don't want to decrease our share in the pie at all and not hire any more workers, then the cooperative, which is a bit more long-sighted, will eventually take over and replace that dysfunctional cooperative. It's the same reason why cooperatives themselves do expand and don't pay themselves £100,000 a minute.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, so they are more long-sighted in that regard. And back to the idea of expropriation. So, believe it or not, I actually, in terms of the kulaks, who were letting their food production rot because they were trying to up the prices. If you're letting your food rot, then you are effectively not using that property. So use of property rights no longer apply to you. That property is now up for grabs. And so this is why in natural monopolies and perhaps just general monopolies anyway, consumer ownership is justified because ownership doesn't really apply. Sorry, use and occupancy doesn't apply anymore, does it? Because if you're letting a load of crops rot, then you're not using them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would be in favor on anarchist grounds for expropriating the kulaks.
All right. Well, I don't really see how that response is that much different from mine, because I mean, under my context though, there would still be a market in a sense, but where you don't leave it up to the market to dictate economic production and the flow of your economy. I mean, under such an instance, there would be less incentive to hoard and basically speculate in such a manner. Would there not?
You cut out a bit there. Can you repeat that?
I said that under the context of any sort of market economy in general, I mean, there's just for the sake of enrichment, there is going to be some degree of incentive to speculate, to not hire as many people as they possibly could, to engage in shitty activity X, Y, and Z to basically to increase personal enrichment. And I know that you can point out this, and that, like, oh, we could expropriate, but don't you think the fact that there's an incentive to engage in these shitty behaviors is kind of endemic in the first place?
It was endemic to the human species, I suppose.
Well, not necessarily.
I think humans are a mixed bag, let's say.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm just saying that within the context of a socialist planned economy, I mean, you could do away with the incentive for that. I'm trying to say that you could do away with the incentive for that kind of private enrichment or the incentive for that sort of foul play, and you could render the need for competition obsolete. It shouldn't. I don't believe it should be about competition so much as cooperation, and in the process, you could eliminate economic turbulence. You could eliminate class struggle. You could eliminate a lot of the waste and efficiency that's associated with the market economy as well. And that's the reason why I think we should have a prioritized, concentrated effort towards a planned economy.
Historic examples kind of point in the directions of a lot of people within these governments acting in favor of private enrichment. For example, China, a lot of members of the Communist Party themselves are billionaires, and we would say that they are using the state apparatus for their own private enrichment, wouldn't we?
Yes. China went backwards. They had a capitalist restoration, a semi-capitalist restoration in the 1980s. This is true.
So
pretty much all of Warsaw and all the socialist countries that existed a century ago are gone. But my point is that they, using their methods and doing the things that they did right, they made it further than any socialist project ever has. I mean, I would say that the main contributing factors to why they aren't still around, or one of the main contributing factors, is part of what you said. Their political systems were too top down, but on the other hand, I would also say because they didn't take it far enough. They didn't go beyond money. They didn't go beyond basic commodity production in the ways that they needed to circumvent restoration. So I would say,
and that's a problem. So, for example, if they did take it further, they would inevitably be accelerating the withering away of the state, wouldn't they? But the state is their job. They have no incentive to allow that to wither away.
I would say it largely depends on who you're talking about, because there were definitely people within management that felt like their positions were threatened by certain progressive economic policies. I think the conservative wing is mostly what you're talking about, but yeah, this is the reason why I say that rather than just not have a state, we should have a state that is as accountable as possible. Like, one way or another, we're going to have a state, which is why we need to make it the most accountable, democratic, the best state that we can possibly make it. And that's what I'm trying to figure out here. And within the Soviet project, I see a lot that we can learn from, because as I've said, they've made it further than any other socialist project has up to that point, you know?
I think every statist wants to make the best possible state, don't they? And we've heard it many times in the past, haven't we?
Yeah.
This is why.
But the thing is that within the context of the USSR, for like the first time in history, we've actually had a government that protects and cares about the interests of its own working class.
Yeah, I don't. Anarchists at the time didn't question the sincerity of the worker state in Russia. Malatesta, I think I've given you the quote by Malatesta on how Lenin and Trotsky and etc. will not ever betray their revolution. However, their revolution will, or their state apparatus will eventually betray them, as it did for Trotsky. Just by the way vanguardism, I think, works.
I mean, I'm sure you could find, I'm not saying that you can't find some intrinsic flaws or contradictions within Lenin's thought, but my solution is to figure out what their shortcomings were. That way we can improve upon them and go beyond what they achieved. Because in my mind, this is an evolutionary process. You don't, in my eyes, I don't really think it's a good idea to, okay, this project failed, but they achieved a fuck ton in their time. My idea is we can take that and improve upon it and build upon it, rather than just throw it out the window because, you know, they offended my moral sensibilities here, or they didn't achieve, or because they didn't achieve everything that I wanted to there. You know, the evolution of communism, in the same manner as capitalism or other economic systems, it's a long, arduous process. You know, it's an evolution.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, but it's the same. It's the same with gradualism and anarchism. It's going to be a long process, sadly, and there are going to be failures. There are going to be. I'm not going to deny there's problems with anarchism or problems with previous anarchist societies, but again, it's going to be something for anarchists to examine ourselves and try and perfect, just along the lines of free association and economic decentralization. The final, I don't know if we want to move on a little bit, but the final point about our disagreements was going to be the ethics. You mentioned moral sensibilities.
So I want to say that it's not that I don't think ethics matter. All right. I do think ethics matter, and we do need a moral framework for whatever kind of society that we are trying to build. The argument that I originally posed during our debate was that I don't think our main arguments should be primarily ethics driven, just because I feel like people are more convinced by pragmatism and utilitarianism is all.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you. But I'm saying it's not a question of, we weren't debating strategy. We were debating exactly what policies we're going to be advocating. And so as people who are already convinced in a post-capitalist society, we would need to include the ethics discussion when we're basing our politics, when we are talking about our political applications, because politics is applied ethics at the end of the day.
Right.
So it is important, isn't it? So I'm an egoist. So my position is I don't think any one individual is obligated to serve another person or any other kind of ideal. I think you're muted. Okay. And so from that premise, I think anarchism follows quite naturally. So, for example, if we talk about the appeal to mutuality, that would justify things like useful property. That would justify worker cooperatives. That would justify free and voluntary associations. People joining associations and producing for their own benefit first, versus being obliged to participate in some wider, greater cause. That is the ethical framework which I'm coming from. Now, it's not necessarily I condemn the evilness of altruism or anything like that. It is simply a descriptive claim about the meaning of life, even. So I take it from Camus that he said the meaning of life is whatever you're doing which prevents you from committing suicide. And what he effectively meant by that is you are the arbitrator of your very existence. So you're going to carry on existing so long as you deem life valuable. And to deem life valuable, you need to pursue your own value judgments.
Is that it?
For now, I was wondering if you got any questions so far.
Oh, questions about egoism.
Or objections, or whichever.
Questions about egoism. I guess I'll just reiterate my stance in that, you know, we're moving towards many becoming one, and we have been for a very long time. So, you know, a bunch of little stupid things come together and make a very intelligent thing. You know, the human body, and that people form civilizations, bunch of intelligent beings come together to create yet another super organism. And when you look at like the trends within capitalist society, it really does sow the seeds for communism over time with, you know, as a progressive force. But my stance is that, you know, we should care about individual freedom and liberty, but, you know, the Marxist view is that freedom of the individual can only truly be achieved if the entire group has been freed. So freedom of the group can, like, they both come together, like freedom of the individual, freedom of the group. In order for the individual to truly be free, the group needs to truly be free. And
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So,
Because
and this lays the groundwork for a bunch of other questions. How do we go about doing that? We see the dialectic between exploiter, exploited, workers and owners, and the group isn't free if you have a minority that's able to impose its will at the expense of the majority. So the goal should be to basically overturn that system and create one where everyone's free, everyone has power. I mean, of course, as long as it doesn't come at the expense of others. But that's like the whole point of a society, of course. We're all plugged into a system, and you can have problems with that system. You can even want to change that system, but I mean, one way or another, we're all part of the system, and the goal is to make a system that serves the needs of everyone and takes care of everybody.
Yeah, so anarchists and Bakuninists at the time agreed with that general idea that now, so long as power structures themselves exist, nobody can be free. As in, the powerful themselves aren't free; they are still obligated to do things which preserve themselves against a unwilling mass, if you know what I mean.
Right. So I don't know if you want to wrap up, because I kind of want to end it here. I actually want to go grab something to eat real quick, but
yeah, I'll be getting some beers in a minute.
Yeah. Do you have any final memes before we go on, like, say, a 5 to 10 minute intermission?
Yeah. So my last words on this is a quote from Mike Serner: "The labourers have the most enormous power in their hands. And if they once became thoroughly conscious of it and used it, nothing would withstand them. They only have to stop labour, regard the product of labour as theirs, and enjoy it. This is the sense of the labour disturbances which show themselves here and there. The state rests on the slaver of labour, and if labour becomes free, the state is lost." And that is from The Unique and Its Own, 1845.
Yeah. I think I'll just voice what my ultimate issue with anarchism is, I guess, because you talk a great deal about authoritarianism, or like the whole role of the state and so on, and my position is that my issue with anarchism is the same issue that I have with a lot of far left undercurrents. And when I say far left, I mean people that are like to my left, so ultras. At the heart of like ultra leftism, you'll find is individualism. It's the idea that what's best for me and my group is ultimately what's best for everyone, and that as long as me and my group are allowed to move and do as we will unimpeded, then the best outcomes can be realized. So I would say the ultimate issue I have with anarchism is it just seems like, so you have a state, that acts on behalf of workers, but if you take pause with like that state's actions and the actions that it takes to, forward the construction of socialism. I mean, unless your position is that state is just totally disingenuous in its actions, then the idea that like a small group can just oppose the will of the entire society that they're connected to, I'm afraid to say, is a very individualistic mindset, my friend. And I think that's part of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm not too discomfortable with the accusation of being individualistic, because I would say I don't really make the appeal to a majority. I don't think what the majority wants is always right. Emma Goldman exclaimed that the majority is often a dead weight on progress, and we know this. The Russian Revolution was forwarded by a minority. It was like 70% of the population who were in favor of the Bolsheviks. The French Revolution was fought for a minority, whilst a majority just sort of moaned about it. So I will still say quite happily that, okay, I am the minority, but I'm still going to act in my self-interest because I'm not a utilitarian. I don't subject myself to the majority will.
All right. So let's go ahead and cut it off there. I'm
Okay.
going to respond to this. Well, no. Wait, what? No, you. Yeah. No industrialization can happen through merely trade, education, and labor mobilization. Not that capitalism's ideal, but it did what tankies boast about for MLs without anything. Excuse me. So really, hold on. In the last, so hold on a second, buddy. So you're telling me that no famines have ever happened under capitalism? Is that what you're trying to say? That capitalism modernized without famines? Hold on a second.
I have a feeling that I know this person, and that wouldn't be what he's saying.
Oh, well, I hope I'm not misrepresenting them, but I just want you to know that these are a bunch of recorded famines, and that 90% of the famines that have happened in like the last 100, 150 years, vast majority of them have been in capitalist countries, my friend. So, you can sit here and say, oh, there were famines under socialism. People always bring up the famines under socialism like it's a slam dunk, when these were famine-prone countries that were struggling with famines for centuries. They have a famine within the first 5 to 10 years of socialism. They never have another famine again, and calorie consumption just linearly increases after the revolution. So, I mean, I don't know what to say besides you can take that point and shove it, my friend. But anyways, I'm still here. I'm just standing up.
Fair enough. So if we've ended the anarchism debate and we're going to move on to other things, I'm going to go and get myself some beers.
Yeah. All right, you go and get your beers. I'm going to respond. Which capitalist countries? Have you ever heard of the Irish potato famine?
Bengal, it said, as well.
Yeah, Bengal, the El Nino famines that were exasperated and made like 20 times worse because of British foreign policy. There are still famines going on in capitalist countries to this day, down in Africa. I mean, in fact, like the famines actually came to an end after the socialist countries took power. And I'll go ahead and leave a reference for you. Hold on. I'm going to post this study. This is a study that BTFOs. This is the study that BTFOs, freaking anti-communists. But here, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and I'll let you read the abstract while I'm away. So, there. This kills the ultra. I'll be back. All right, guys, I'm going to go run to the corner store real quick. I'll be back in, we'll call it 5 to 10 minutes tops. 1 moment.
I'm back. There's no beer. My brother drank it all.
I'm going to go run to the corner store real quick. I'll be back in like 5 or so minutes. But go ahead and chat with chat.
Chat with who? Oh, chat with chat.
Yeah, chat with chat. Guys, talk to ThoughtBat. That way he can entertain you while I'm away. I'll be back in like 5 to 10 minutes.
I'll need to go to the thing. I've never done a live stream before. Bear me a second. I need to get to the actual thing so I can see the chat. Fellow trip. Right, okay. How does this work then? So I just read comments and then I answer them. Lol. I thought about your ideology is childish. That's not an argument. Where are you from, boy? I'm from Wales. Dialectical vegan egoist says, thought about how will anarchism deal with unequal development between global north and south? I would have to ask what exactly the question is in terms of what the problem is. The problem at the moment is the exploitation of the south from the north. I imagine a global anarchist economy would not involve that. Can you elaborate on that? This has to be bait. Forgive me, I genuinely don't know how to run a live stream properly. Let's have a look. Thought about Lord Pastor, I know you. Anarchism is a form of federalist government which is inherently less free than other state structures. How do you reconcile this with liberty? Which is, well, I'm just going to deny that anarchism is less free than other state structures. I don't understand why that's the point. Let's have a look at this. This is how hard it is to be Vorsh. Like, gee whiz, I can't do this. I want to talk to Thought about anarchism in the state. I'm scrolling up now, by the way. Well, no, you can't talk to me. Do you think acid communism is a worthwhile to talk about? I don't know what acid communism is, to be honest. Thought about what is stopping imperialists from just pile driving your anarchist state? Well, soldiers, effectively. That's what it is. I mean, so the Magnovia had its own army of about 100,000 peasants, and it was a voluntary army, as it was. It was both democratic and voluntary. To resist imperialism, all you need is enough economic resources to be self-sufficient, and you need to have personnel. You need to have soldiers. You need to have equipment. You need to have ammunition. I don't believe a centralized state is needed to provide some kind of resistance. Ukraine did pretty well. They fought off the White Russians. They fought off the Central Powers. Sorry, yes, the Central Powers. And they carried on fighting off the Bolsheviks for a while until the USSR inevitably overthrew them. I don't think a centralized state would have overthrown them. The main criticism from communists against anarchists is the previous anarchist societies which have existed have been steamrolled by other superior states. But I don't think a centralized state would have saved them. Personally, what happens when your voluntary army faces a professional army? Well, I mean, again, communists will make this argument all the time, but they are proposing that a revolution be done by a voluntary army against the professional army of the capitalist state. It's not really it's not really a thing that's unique to anarchist ideas. It reduces the subjective will of the citizens by diluting their will through federal representatives instead of proportional representatives. What? I don't think centralizing a country and giving it proportional democracy necessarily increases freedom. Don't understand that. He swerved it, sad, another time. I don't understand what we've done wrong. Cosmonaut, thought about how would your preferred system prevent the proliferation of organized crime? Interesting. So, effectively, the mafia exists, and well, people are driven into organized crime through poverty, aren't they? Let's be honest. That is one of the main reasons people go into organized crime, because the established system doesn't really help them out. But the mafia and stuff can be dealt with in a similar manner to the way we deal with them today, just through legal regimes and enforcement of those regimes. All you have is a polycentric legal order in replace of a monopoly in force. Thought bad. Is China socialist? No. Not really. It's predominantly a capitalist economy, although I understand that the system in power is... Sorry, the people in power are socialists themselves. Terrible answer. I'm not too sure what your question was or how I could answer it better. This live streaming stuff is harder than I thought. So would you rather have national issues decided by people who would not reflect the will of the populace? I don't think the will of the population needs to be reflected. I don't think the majority has any virtue. Just because most people agree with it doesn't mean it's a good thing. How would an anarchist society deal with Rorsch execution? I'm joking. I'll just ignore him, I suppose. I don't feel like people are enjoying my answers. Big sad. Oliver, I know who you are. Is adding pineapple to pizza authoritarian? Yeah. Please comment. Anarchism is a product of despair. I suppose it is a product of despair. People despair with the system and they want to get rid of it. So, yeah, you have to despair the system. Or despair of the system. Disagree with the claim that the top of the CPC is socialist. Yeah, I can understand that, because since a lot of them are themselves billionaires. Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to say. Depends what our definitions are. What is my education? I got a degree in education studies, which sounds like a joke. And then I did a primary teacher training course over this last year. So I'm trying to find my first teaching post. Don't sweat it. Thought about you doing pretty good, actually. Well, fair enough. Thank you very much. Socialism for all disagrees, though. Why is anarchism adventurous? Don't understand that. I thought about, would you be okay with a state if it did in fact act amazingly? Well, I mean, I suppose I would have to, wouldn't it? If it's the most amazing state and it's literally giving us a paradise, then I suppose I'd have to be satisfied with it. But the main criticism is that states never do provide amazing living conditions. So Oliver's saying,
the Marxist-Leninist states provided better living conditions than they would have if they just stayed capitalist or feudalist.
I can agree with that, and also living conditions got worse after they stopped being things. I'm not in favour of colour revolutions. If anyone says the Russian Federation today is better than the Soviet Union, I think they're just lying through their teeth.
Yeah, no. At least we can agree on that the restoration of capitalism was definitely not an improvement. Yeah,
I had this debate with a conservative in one of my previous debating societies, and he was very much on board with going into China and effectively just re-liberalizing it, and really you just end up with another Russian Federation. This guy has. So socialism for all sadly doesn't like me. He says my answers are terrible. I've got nothing to say. So I'm big sad now.
Yeah, I apologize. S4A. I apologize. Well, it is what it is.
Yeah, big stuff.
Can't please everybody, man. But what I do have is something that you might be interested in. Well, maybe not. But really, it's just news. I want to talk about the news. Actually, no, I don't. I actually want to talk about this real quick. So my most recent video, because I want to do a segment about this.
Yep.
So we're not going to watch this, but what we are going to do is we are going to full screen, and I'm going to show you guys what I've got here. So 534 comments, 9,043 views. Yeah, this shit went viral. So the reason why I want to talk about this today is mainly because I want to collectively BTFO Jordan Peterson stands, Vosh stands that have decided to comment on this video, right? So it's kind of funny to me how these people like pride themselves on being so much better than conservatives and knowing, like, you know, being left wing, like they're above the grain, right? Like they know how the world works, so to speak. It's funny to me how these people pride themselves on that, but then they'll literally like engage in like the same sort of bad faith like tactics and the same sort of attacks, you know, and they'll just shut their brains off whenever someone is criticizing their favorite person on the internet. So here's what I'm talking about. If you go through, check this out. So here we go. Man still not being over BTFO. Here's the debate. Oh, yeah.
Oh, is that the one that you had with Vosh?
Yeah. So people say that you lost. Like the main responses, all these people have to say is you lost the debate. Joker laugh out of context, and that's really it. A lot of these people don't even really have anything like substantial to say. I mean, some people are pointing out that some of my examples aren't very good. But yeah, the most substantive responses that I have seen from people here are telling me like the Afghanistan example wasn't really that good. And I mean, I'd be primed to agree, but like even then, like sitting here saying like, oh, you know, like he's sitting here saying, oh, you know, it'll be Cambodia if we leave, then China will take over. Like, if you're sitting here making this emphasis about China coming in and filling the power vacuum, you know, that to some degree implies that you have a problem with that, right? And it would be preferable for you to stay in Afghanistan, no?
Yeah. It seems to me that he's using the whole... it's the... What is it? Appeal to lesser evils kind of thing, where you could sort of through that you could justify British imperialism in Australia and say, well, if the British wouldn't do it, then the French will. It's like, well, it's still bad. It's still not good.
Yeah. So people are like, oh, you mad, bro? All these people have to say is like, you mad, bro?
Yeah, I'm going to call these socialism for all responses because they just lack substance, to be honest.
Yeah, and out of context. I ended up, dude, are you the Joker? You see what I'm saying? These people have nothing.
Yeah, they're not really. Yeah, they're just trolls, really. I mean,
yeah,
there's nothing.
So this person's saying like, Bosch supports the endless occupation of Afghanistan. Yes, the outright liar here. Certainly not you. You definitely aren't taking a clip exactly out of context. That's all they have to say. So I think it's safe to say that I've won. Just saying. I think I've won this exchange because if these people have nothing to say in response and all they're going to do is make excuses for him and all they're going to do is like try and cherry pick like certain examples to try and say that I did this, and that. Okay, like, so, I mean, at the end of it, I don't know what to say, man, but they're all talking about how angry I am. I don't know. 500 people are coming to this chat to tell me how they're not mad and how I'm the one who's mad, apparently. But whatever.
Vorshite's gonna Vorshite, really.
Yeah, pretty much.
There's nothing new from them, nothing unexpected from them. You know, Vorsh comes out of a complete drivel, and then it just infects their own minds.
Yeah, I'm not even going to waste much time on it. There's the segment. That's all these people are worth to me. But, so
I apologize. I couldn't really read the comments. I was trying to zoom in on this thing, but it didn't work.
Don't worry about it, man. These people have nothing these people literally have nothing substantial to say. Seethe, cope, out of context, ha, you lost debate. That's pretty much all you're going to be seeing over and over again.
Yeah. And that's what Vorsh's own arguments boil down to, really. If you watch them, I could sit with him and just give my own talking points, and then he'll just try and make me mad, and then I'll look mad, and then he'll use that as the leverage to declare victory. So
yeah,
it's kind of why at first I was umming and ahhing about whether or not to go on the present Sunday debate, because I'm not really in favour of these kinds of I'm not really in favour of debating as a means to really find any kind of truth. Vorsh admits this; he acknowledges it, but he says, "Oh, it's so people can be persuaded to your side, or it's to compete narratively, sort of thing."
Yeah.
But even then, like, it's still dependent on dick swinging at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, that's all it is, really. It's not really about discovering truth or having an honest conversation about the ideas. What it's actually about, in the grand scheme of things, is just winning or looking like you're winning. So
yeah,
that's really all it's about. And he's going to use whatever bad faith tactics that he can in order to do that. He's going to poison the well. He's going to gaslight. He's going to, outright lie about bullshit. He's going to take contradictory positions on the same topic, and he's just going to basically reword whatever he says so that he can avoid taking responsibility for his own rhetoric, That way he doesn't have to own up to it, and he doesn't have to ever admit that he's wrong about anything, That's kind of how it is.
And the interesting thing is, I went into his server, and one of his rules is like he doesn't want to give any kind of platform for leftists to disagree with him on things like strategy. So he wouldn't have me on to talk about gradualism, for example. He wouldn't have me on to talk about my criticisms of a transitionary state, for example. He has no interest in that. He has targeted Marxist-Leninists, and he has targeted people from the right, people who he deems as like far off political enemies, to just sort of try and bring into to dick swing and own. Thoughtbat was originally created as like, I want to be a catalyst to a change in that kind of thing. I think Sundays beat me to it, but I wanted to have like to encourage good faith dialogue between leftist movements in general, because I think on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, it's a pretty dire situation, to the point where we don't even understand each other's perspectives anymore, and I think that's a bad thing.
Yeah. All right, so I found something interesting right here. Let me go ahead. It's at 112.59. So 112.59. Yeah, 112. So about 113. This is Vosh admitting that it's okay to be intellectually dishonest if it means manipulate. So right here, I should have included this fucking clip, because he straight up admits here that it's okay to be intellectually dishonest. So I'm gonna show this, and I'm gonna fucking nail these Voshites to the cross over this. So I might actually use this clip in a follow-up video. But no, not you.
Do it.
Get rid of all content which has any misleading elements for the advocacy of liberal or left-leaning politics.
Can you hear it fine?
Yeah, I can hear it. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that would destroy almost everything. We would be left with NPR-style, incredibly empirical, fact-based, and dry commentary, high-level academia accessible only content, and maybe a couple of people left capable of threading that line.
Wait, this is a
Wait, hold on. There are people in chat saying good. We lose if that happens.
Wait, I think that this is a bad dichotomy. You can have content that's edgy, engaging, entertaining, aesthetic, that doesn't mislead people or lie.
The expectation that even reductive content must be excised from people on our side of the
No, I
political
think
aisle.
reductive content is okay.
Well,
But
what's
I'm
the
just-
line then?
The line is when you're misreporting the facts, or if you're like completely misrepresenting something, or if you're being so reductive that you're being incorrect.
This is the most I've ever fucking loved Destiny. Holy shit.
There's another exchange with him and Destiny where he says, well, the right has given this narrative. I need to give a counter narrative. It was regarding the what was it? It was the shooting of that guy. Oh, was it called Kavanaugh? Kavanaugh something? And Vorsh was responding to Destiny, and Destiny says, "Oh, these are the facts. This is what happened." And Vorsh is saying, "Well, that's what the right's saying. I need to give a counter narrative." And from then on, you're just saying, "Well, don't trust me. I sometimes lie."
Oh, yeah, no. Dude, send me that clip. Guys, if you find more clips like this where Vosh is just straight up admitting that he's dishonest, I will make a follow-up video and I will nail these motherfuckers to the cross. Like, I'm gonna keep this shit. I'm gonna pocket it. You know. So any Voshites that are watching this, I'm gonna go ahead and play that again for you in case you have bad hearing. But your champion is straight up saying here, like in this video, that it is okay to lie to people in order to convince them of your side. And I regret not including this in the video.
If we were to get rid of all content which has any misleading elements for the advocacy of liberal or left-leaning politics, I think that would destroy almost everything. We would be left with NPR-style, incredibly empirical, fact-based, and dry commentary, high-level academia, accessible-only content, and maybe a couple of people left capable of threading that line.
Wait,
hold on. There are people in chat saying good. We lose if that happens.
I think that this is a bad dichotomy. You can have content that's edgy, engaging, entertaining, aesthetic. It doesn't mislead people or lie.
The expectation that even reductive...
That's such a false dichotomy, though. Like, who's saying that you can't be honest and edgy at the same time? Look at TJ the Amazing Atheist. He makes incredibly edgy content, and all he does is preach the truth. He doesn't have to fucking grift to get people's attention.
It's beyond propaganda. It's beyond propaganda, isn't it? Propaganda can be based on truth, and it can be just effectively just emotional connections to the truth, but spinning lies to for the better outcome. This is him being a utilitarian. This is the consequence of utilitarians. They are happy to lie as long as they get what they desire. Sorry, get the results that they desire. They do it all the time.
It's terrible. That's horrible. You know, like, do you not realize, like, from a utilitarian consequentialist standpoint, the long-term consequences of this is that you're just going to sabotage your own credibility. Like, if you're on record for lying and, you know, not telling the truth and not being transparent, and like it's well known that you're an intellectually dishonest douchebag, then you're just going to sabotage your own credibility when the truth inevitably emerges, as it usually does. Like, so with someone like this, I don't know, man. This isn't my style, and I don't like. This is one of the main issues that I have with someone like a Vosh, and why I have so much more. I'm not gonna lie, I have a lot more respect for Steven here than I do for Vosh. At least Steven is like honest about, oh, you know, we need to stay in Afghanistan. You know, I can appreciate someone like a Steven being honest about that a lot more than someone pretending to want to be out of Afghanistan and paying lip service to anti-imperialism some of the time, while fucking rhetorically trying to fearmonger about our geopolitical enemies if we do actually engage in anti-imperialist activity.
Yeah, it's just a disappointment, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's
what it is. It is what it is.
All I have to say. But yeah, no, that pisses me off. If you can send me a clip, like the clip where you were talking about that.
I haven't got a timestamp, but I've sent it to the chat. Sorry, to the YouTube chat.
Okay.
I'm kind of relying on your viewers to sort of find it for me. I can go away and find you the timestamp later on.
We don't have to do it now. We can do it sometime.
Yeah, I can. I'll be able to find it. But he does say that's the right's narrative. We need to come up with a counter narrative, just for the sake of it, and that's just stupid. Is what it is. But
I just want anyways, I guess we can move on finally to the news. But so, did you know? What do you know about America's new infrastructure bill that passed?
I was talking to my friend who is watching this right now, and he said I said that we'll probably be talking about this, and he said I need to go and search it up. Sadly, I didn't. I was too busy building things, so no, I don't know anything about it at all.
Yeah. So here's the deal with it. All right. So Donald Trump a few years ago proposed an infrastructure bill, basically the same one, same infrastructure bill that what it's doing effectively is taking public infrastructure and it's selling it off to the private sector. And they're using this money to finance new infrastructure on top of that. So there is government funding for it, but it is involving the selling off and privatizing of some of our infrastructure, which is a serious problem.
Right.
So
he's effectively privatizing American infrastructure.
Oh yeah.
So he's doing what New Labour did, and you watch every single Democrat try and defend it and say it's for the good of society in general when it won't be. So, and then in 10 years' time, if Bernie Sanders some other Bernie Sanders, they'll end up just saying, "Oh, that was evil. We should never have done it." Anyway, go on.
Exactly. So here's. Excuse me, I really shouldn't be eating, but I have an article about it right here. Bipartisan Senate infrastructure plan is a stalking horse for privatization. If you believe the Senate bipartisan infrastructure proposal is just part of a whole, that some of President Biden's spending can pass in there under a regular order, and the rest in a larger reconciliation package, then you might see it as a benign way to boost Biden's bipartisan deal-making capabilities without sacrificing anything. As I've written, there's not yet enough trust among the Democratic caucus for Biden to make that sale. But if you see the bill as not wholly additive but subtractive, you might reject it on its own terms. We haven't heard this critique much from progressive opponents of the proposal, yada, yada. So here's the deal. We know Republicans have rejected offsetting any of the $539 billion in new spending in the bill with tax increases. Biden's preferred method for his entire American Jobs and Families plan. Instead, the fact sheet lists 11 alternatives. It does vow to reduce the IRS tax cap, earmarking more money for tax enforcement to increase revenue from existing value. But the Gang of 21 agrees with the Congressional Budget Office picayune scoring of that provision, $40 billion in investment only yielding $60 billion in revenue, forcing them to dig deeper. Well, anyways, it takes 2 seconds to recognize how ridiculous this is. The government doesn't require 10% margin on equity, tax credits, and investment payments. That layer of profit that gets built into expenditure. Governments usually contract out design and construction to private contractors, but there's only one way for these companies to reduce ownership and operation costs below what the public sector would spend, which is still being profitable. They can cut back either on safety or labor or maintenance. They can extract a lot of profit from users of the infrastructure. If the infrastructure isn't inherently profitable, like a bridge in New York City or a toll road in South California might be, the upgrade probably won't get built. Democrats rightly and loudly objected to giving up public assets for private investors at the time. The biggest moneymakers would be favored, they said, and less lucrative projects in rural or impoverished areas are shunned. Governments would not only lose ownership, but democratic control over roads, water systems, electric grids, and who knows what else. As companies manage costs, it could lead to less resilience, more dangerous infrastructure, and the public would have a high likelihood of being gouged. So why would Democrats entertain going down the exact same road under Biden that they rebuffed on Trump? The private activity bonds referenced in the bipartisan proposal are a soft version of the Trump's tax scheme of tax-exempt bonds to entice investors into infrastructure projects. A substantial amount of private activity bonds issued by the Democratic Department of Transportation in recent years are for highly occupancy toll lanes. Public-private partnerships are a euphemism for privatization, with companies controlling a natural monopoly on an expressway or water line. So, they're talking about asset recycling. This is an idea imported from Australia, which is really just an enormous shell game. It involves selling off public infrastructure to acquire the resources to build new infrastructure. It's literally robbing Peter to pay Paul. Naturally, the Trump administration was enthusiastic about it, though they never passed the legislation on it. That's fallen to this bipartisan group. Asset recycling didn't work in Australia, mind you. States and territories were offered a 15% subsidy to rapidly sell off their existing assets. Some of the resulting deals include the Northern Territory in Australia, selling the Darwin port to a Chinese firm for 99 years, without even having another infrastructure project ready to spend money on. The fire sales underpriced the assets, and the proceeds were rushed into unsound new projects, largely based on powerful politicians wanted rather than what the public needed. Our states with assets to sell won more capital for their infrastructure than states that might have needed more. By 2016, the Australian program shut down, but it lives on in the U.S. proposal. Our experience with privatization has drawn similar criticism. As its triumph of short-term thinking and long-term pain, the city of Chicago sold off 36,000 parking meters to Wall Street-led investor group in 2009, taking back $1.15 billion to plug budget holes. Chicago drivers will pay $11 billion over the next 75 years of the deal to parks, and fees are scheduled to rise as much as 800%. All right. So what else do we got here? But Democrats in Congress, who strongly condemned this very concept 4 years ago when Trump proposed it, have been mostly silent on it now. So it's in the bill. In other words, yeah, indeed, 10 Senate Democrats signed off on the privatization scheme. Bernie Sanders, chair of the Senate Budget Committee, did reference the privatization of infrastructure on Meet the Press over this weekend as a reason to not support the bipartisan proposal. But he added, "We don't have the details right now." Okay, great. So, yeah, but Blue Tribe do it so good, right?
Yeah, it is what it is. A moderate party is appealing to the right to try and solidify its power. To solidify its popularity. We've seen this over and over and over again. It just so happens it's what keeps New Labour in power. It's what kept New Labour in power. As soon as they started moving left, they were ejected from office. So the Democrats are just doing what Labour did.
It's messed up. It's messed up, man. It's not right. You know, it's like this whole lesser evil bullshit starts to feel so disingenuous when like all the exact same fucking shit that was happening under Trump is still occurring under the Biden administration, but the difference is the mainstream media just doesn't talk about it.
They won't talk about it. The mainstream media is just, in America at least, is Democrat biased. So there's no reason to. They know they'll lose their own members. Their own supporters. But they're fine with it anyway because they've got material interest in having it be that way.
Yeah.
But, the Democrats are, of course, the path towards socialism, as Vorsh has told me.
Yeah. Honestly, man, it's just so fucked up because, these people were making the argument that we can push them left, and this dude has done nothing but do polemics against people that are actually trying to push them left, from Jimmy Dore to this one guy who was advocating for a $20 minimum wage. I mean, that's right. That's an example I should have included. Bosch was arguing against the minimum wage increase, and I'm sure his fucking fans were like, "Oh, out of context, right? He just means we shouldn't raise it to $20 an hour super fast. But the truth is that minimum wage would be about $20 an hour if it kept pace with inflation and the rate and increasing rates of productivity. So we could totally afford it. It would involve raising the prices of goods, pennies on the dollar. I don't know, man.
Walsh is terrified of that policy becoming politically unpopular, though.
Yeah, no, this is like with the rad lib crowd in general, and this isn't just Vosh, this is just libs, rad libs in general, this demographic. These people think we have all the time in the world to just sit around and wait for politicians to change things, and that we can just work within the Democrats. We need to, I was talking about this with the Cincinnati Socialists today in our meeting, but there needs to be like an exodus from these major parties, and people need to form their own working class alternative. Because the Democrats, as my comrades called it, is the graveyard of leftism. It's the graveyard of revolutionary thought. It's the graveyard of activism. It is a place where people with genuine concerns and grievances go to try and fight for the right thing, to try and fight for good reform, be it climate change, higher wages. It is a place where they go to be co-opted and recuperated into a completely ineffective political machine that gives people about 5%, more like 2% of what they were originally asking for.
Yes, it's its own black hole of
Yeah.
support. And then they'll say next time, make sure you vote Democrat, make sure you vote Democrat. And whilst the Democrats see that no matter how crappy they behave, they're still getting support from the left.
Yeah, no.
And so they're not going to change. They have no incentive to change.
Yeah,
if we keep supporting the lesser of two evils.
But the thing is it's not just that. Even if we did leave, they would still have no incentive to change because we're just expected to go vote for them. Like, you can't support a third party or else you're going to split the vote. Yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know, man. Like, we need to eventually leave them behind completely. Like, we need a third party alternative. I'm in favor of a coalition of parties, more or less. Like, we take all the big socialist orgs and we try to form one, like, umbrella or tent organization. That's something that I've kind of had. Sort of like the DSA, except, you know, completely decoupled from the Democrats.
That would be lovely if communist movements didn't keep splitting all the time.
Yeah. Well, they can even stay their own independent parties, is what I'm saying. It's just we form like one big coalition that has delegates from all the parties combined into one. I think that would be nice. Stay away from my pizza.
Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine, because I've had experiences with both the Socialist Worker Party and the Socialist Party, and I've been in both of their spaces, and the way they talk about each other, they're both Trotskyist groups, but the way they talk about each other, I can't imagine them ever coming together. I don't know if the situation is the same in the US, but what's it called? Sectarianism is quite a big thing. Even Monty Python commented on it in Life of Brian. They had that sketch where, are you with the People's Front of Judea? And they go, piss off, we're the Judean People's Front. That was it was taking the piss out of the sectarianism of left-wing movements.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's because leftists typically, we have serious disagreements on important topics, and, you know, we actually care about our principles and so on. And, like, I know why. I know there are a few different reasons why it's a lot easier for the right to unite than the left, but I think the sectarianism on the left is kind of overplayed as well, just because, like, the right wing has the backing of big money oligarchy and so on. The left wing does not. So I think it's only an appearance that the left can't truly unite. I feel like left unity is kind of a meme, but I also feel like the sectarianism is a little bit over exaggerated.
Yeah.
Let's see. Europe has declined. It's gone from 40% of the world, while America has remained fairly stable. Yeah. America's going to stay stable for a while. I mean, yeah, the imperial core is having contradictions, but I don't know. I feel like it's going to take a serious catastrophe before people actually start to give a shit about socialism. But anyways. I've got one last thing I want to show you guys. The crisis of the 21st century. Why is America crazy now? Why the world is crazy. So this guy's called WHATIFALTHIST, and let's go ahead and talk about. I'll go ahead and post this. Are you ready
Is that
for
alt history is in alternate history?
Yeah, WHATIFALTHIST.
Alt history. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So apparently this is like peak ideology, but we'll see. I'm not going to watch all of it, but my friends and my buddies on Discord have been telling me to react to this forever. So let's go ahead and see what it's about.
Oof, should be exciting.
Let's do this. Actually, I'm going to stop my cam. Anyways.
Being a prophet of doom is overrated. There are always too many of them. If you look at their track record, they generally don't correlate well with actually having horrific events. However, it's a good way of getting attention. If you write an article saying the world's ending, you'll get far more publicity than if you say one in which the world will gradually improve today. However, it's sometimes warranted. What I'll try to sell you here is that the world as we know it will end in the next few decades, like it generally has every 200 to 400 years, and it'll probably end up with a happy ending. Intrigued? Let me explain.
I'm not intrigued.
WHATIFALTHIST. All right. How's the world going to end? Let's listen to this shit. Let's do this.
History is often difficult to learn in its full complexity. I love learning about history and my topics all the time, but I can't read all the time. This is where our sponsor, the Great Courses Plus.
Oh, fuck off.
The Great Courses Plus is a subscription-based video learning service where you can listen to world-class courses on all sorts of subjects.
Yeah.
Of course, I took with historical.
You advertising to me, Trav?
Great courses, which talked about.
All right, there we go.
There we go.
We're going to speed this up because something tells me he's
The
going to take
main
forever
argument
to
I'm
get to
going to
the
make
point.
here is that we've seen crises across history that break the world system, resulting in mass death, revolution, international war, and huge social upheaval across the planet, and that we're about to experience one of these now. The perfect example of this sort of thing occurring is the crisis of the 14th century. In this era, the Black Death halved Eurasia's population. All of Eurasia became ringed in horrific conflict between the 100 Years' War, peasant uprisings, the Mongols being driven out of China, and the bloody Ottoman conquest of the Balkans. In Europe, feudalism was replaced by capitalism and eventually resulted in the Reformation, Age of Exploration, and Scientific Revolution. Meanwhile, most of the Asian civilizations had a large conservative revolution. When you're trying to look for them, these crises have been happening with pretty regular frequency. The 6th century is a perfect example of a crisis like this. One also occurred around the birth of Christ, and others around 550 BC, 900 AD, and 200 AD. We're going to look at the two crises that are chronologically closest to the present, and we thus have the most in similar with. The crisis of the 17th and 19th centuries. Imagine a world where wages are stagnant or declining, where globalization has resulted in massive social disturbances, where the poor gather into massive cities around the world looking for work. Inequalities reach horrific proportions, and governments corrupt, gridlocked, bureaucratic, and irresponsive to the people's needs. In this world, government desperately tries to inflate their currencies to keep up with rising costs. International conflict seems on the verge of starting, while most countries worry about civil wars as political or religious fanaticism reaches a fever pitch. The truth is that I'm simultaneously describing the world in 1610, 1850, and 2020. In the modern world, our story starts after World War II. The ending of the war removed international tariff barriers and the massive impetus of rebuilding the economy increased manufacturing. Productivity had made massive increases in the previous few decades.
All right.
The Western nations didn't have a lot of immigration, birth rates had collapsed before the war, and unions were strong, and so the value of the labor of each individual person was pretty high. The Great Depression destroyed the wealthiest incomes, and the rest was taxed to pay for the war. Inequality was some of the lowest ever in history. This all made 1945 to 1970 in the West and Japan the greatest era to be the common person in history. However, a series of processes started to increase competition for wages. Firstly, immigration and women entering the workforce increased wage competition. I'm not saying these were inherently bad moves. Women and immigrants improved their societies in countless ways, but basic economics dictates when you increase the supply of something and demand can't keep up, then the cost goes down, and when you get down to it, people are a commodity like any other. Massive population growth was also occurring, as the world's population went from 2.5 billion.
All right, so I want to know what this guy's solution is because, I mean, he's basically describing it's kind of a historical materialist analysis. Like, so this is going to go two directions. This guy's either going to say the solution is socialism, or he's going to propose something completely batshit insane that could never fucking work. That's my prediction, one or the other. So what do you think?
I think he might just be. My prediction is he's going to be a doomer.
All right, well, we'll see. So I'm going to skip ahead a bit because I know the world. Here we go. Age of Discord.
To the upper class and not be lower class. The struggle explains lots of stuff like high college costs, as people will pay any price, even if it's unsustainable, to not be poor, and bloated government bureaucracies as government officials try to get their friends more jobs. Members of the elite form into different factions in order to get people like them more jobs, which results in political instability. As the government becomes more bloated and controlled by special interests, it becomes inefficient and runs higher costs since there isn't a strong consensus on what's important. Inflation runs out of control, so it's easier to print money than deal with underlying issues. When government doesn't do things right, people riot, and it often becomes easier to start external wars with hope of bending the international.
Yeah, but America has the magic money printer because we have a world reserve currency, so we can basically print our way out of it, you know?
Yeah, the point about increasing tuition fees, that's very much to do with the monopolistic nature of higher education and the arbitrary licensing requirements as to who can provide qualifications, and also this arbitrary surge in requirements for degrees for jobs which frankly don't need a degree, and the fact there's no real alternative to those providers of higher education means that those providers can charge so much. So it's not exactly a doomsday prediction.
It's a seller's market. Yeah,
it can easily be solved, but it's not, because universities are in cahoots with the government. So
yeah, I mean, of course, and there are a lot of issues that America's having. A lot of, not just America. I mean, I can't speak for Great Britain, but America, a lot of these contradictions. I've even talked about this in a prior video, but the answers to a lot of this shit is really simpler than people think. It's just there's too many gullible people who are just tricked and manipulated by the powers that be to basically being against the things that would actually help them out. And I know this isn't the majority of the population. It's actually a minority. Most people actually want the reforms I'm talking about nowadays. It's just we have a democratic process that's encouraged to it's basically designed not to work. I mean, we have a democratic process that is literally designed not to work.
Effectively, yeah. Didn't we do a study which showed that the US, in the US, no matter how popular a policy was, it had no impact on the likelihood of it being passed.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that study. I've seen some counter studies as well, but really, when you look at like a plurality of data, the truth is America isn't a true oligarchy. What it really is just a really, really, really shitty democracy that only works for like the top 10% of the population.
Economically speaking, it's an oligarchy, but yeah,
economically speaking, it's functionally an oligarchy. Politically speaking, it's just a really shitty, out-of-date, dysfunctional democratic system.
System than it is to solve internal issues. England, for example, forestalled its civil war by 100 years by uniting its nobility by invading and looting France in the Middle Ages. If we compare all these trajectories to the 17th century, everything lines up. Wages stagnated due to a combination of population growth and globalization, by which Spanish gold from America flooded the European money markets. Inequality reached horrific levels while religious fanaticism gripped the European continent. The cost of education skyrocketed, as did inflation. Governments were also highly ineffective. The decade between 1620 and 1660 were horrifying. Some historians estimate that a third of the world's population died in a combination of terrible revolutions, wars, and plague, affecting nearly every nation, such as the Manchu conquest of China, the 30 Years' War, Civil War, freedom okay. If you weren't purposely looking for it. It was inverted entirely in some parts of the world, which resulted in the revolutions of 1848 in places like Italy, the Austrian Empire, and Germany. Okay. However, something remarkable happened: the Industrial Revolution. After 1850, the standard of living grew markedly in northwestern Europe as industry improved individual productivity. Farmland opened up in places like the American Midwest and Argentina.
Well, the thing is, when industrialization first came, it didn't initially improve living standards, though.
Yeah, I'm calling bullshit on that too.
Yeah, actually, living standards actually went down because people went from working out in the farms like 5 to 6 months out of the year and then being off the rest of the year, and living simple agrarian subsistence lifestyles to working like 14 hours a day in factories, being crammed into these tap houses as well. People lost fingers, they got black lung, there was no regulations. Cities were extremely dirty and polluted. So if anything, living standards actually went down during the initial years of industrialization.
Yeah, I would need to see some more substantiation from his claims.
No, yeah, exactly. Really, living standards didn't start to improve until people decided to stop putting up with it and formed trade unions and basically shook the ruling class for reforms like shorter work weeks and higher wages and such. I mean, those things were going to come, but they came a lot faster with the trade union movement.
I was arguing with an ANCAP recently on Facebook, which is the best place to argue with people. Jokes. And he was effectively justifying the horrific living conditions in the Industrial Revolution. Do you know what his justification was? Well, you don't.
What do you have to say?
his opinion was that there was no capital.
Really?
His justification was there was no capital in the Industrial Revolution, and so therefore business owners had to enforce these living conditions onto their workers.
Hold on a second. So there was no capital. So then what's this called? What is it?
Exactly. I mean, he didn't know what capital was, obviously.
Yeah. No, it sounds to me like your friend is a little bit confused, buddy. Yeah, this is capital. But anyways, let's do this.
Collapsed the price of food, and mass production made the cost of life in general cheaper. Excess population moved to the colonies or the Americas. By the time we get to World War I, inequality had collapsed, and young men of both the right and the left were happy to die for their nations. However, once you look outside the industrialized world, the picture gets far more grim. China had the Taiping Rebellion, the third bloodiest war in history, which killed somewhere in the range between 20 to 40 million people, alongside humiliation by the Western powers, collapse into warlords, and a period of humiliation that ended with the Japanese invasion in World War II. The year 1876 saw famines in China, India, Scandinavia, and Brazil that killed somewhere between 30 and 60 million people.
Oh yeah, no, right here. World War II. Oh yeah, so the famines that took place in the 1870s. There was a series of famines that hit South Asia and parts of Africa. It was very widespread. They were known as the El Nino famines, which took place between the 1870s, 80s, and 90s. And there's this great book about it called The Late Victorian Holocausts that just talks about how colonial policy and free market colonial policy is just responsible for literally tens of millions of unnecessary deaths. Like, the food is there, they have like the food and so on to save countless lives, but instead it just goes to the rich regions or it gets hoarded and stockpiled or exported out, and you just end up with so many people that just needlessly starve to death, so that the British East Indian Company can they can turn a higher profit, so they can make more money.
All this, and you still have millions of people in the UK who believe the British Empire was a force for good.
Yeah.
When these examples exist throughout the entire empire. So
between 1850 and 1950, there was no wage growth in India. Not a single penny, not a single dime. Wages remained flat for over a century in India under British colonialism.
I mean, the fact it was owned by a tea company is literally the explanation for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
so, anyways, just wanted to stop on that point.
Scandinavia and Brazil that killed somewhere between 30 and 60 million people. A big reason for the massive deaths that occurred in Central and Eastern Europe during the World Wars was because they were experiencing these same population pressures that had built up over the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Mexico saw two massive waves of death in the long 19th century, one of which being the Wars of Independence and the other being the Mexican Revolution during World War I. However, there's another heartening example, the second half of the 20th century. In the 1970s, there was massive worry that due to the incredible population growth seen at the time, that people would be starving by the end of the century. However, what occurred at this point was the Green Revolution resulted in massive increases in food production, which allowed the world to have 4 times the population while everyone being better fed. It even allowed the world's farmland to shrink, with there being 15% more forests now than there was in 1990. As of now, there are 800 million undernourished people around the world and 2 billion obese, which is absolutely amazing because for the vast majority of history, there have been far more hungry people than fat people.
Wait. So,
that's not a good thing.
So, 1.4 billion obese adults is not a good trend. So, that's the first thing. Second, the statistic of 800 million people that are starving is underestimated. So what the IMF and World Bank have done is they've redefined their standards for poverty statistics on multiple occasions, just changing the definition of extreme poverty, moving the goalpost. Even China's done this. So you'll hear Dengists make this neoliberal talking point that China lifted all these people out of poverty, but when you actually look at the standards they go by, you'll find that a lot of the times they're just moving the goalposts. I'm not saying things haven't generally improved in the last 3 decades, but the improvement is largely exaggerated, and a good chunk of it comes from them just redefining poverty statistics to magically cause millions of poor people to vanish overnight. If you actually look at the threshold for what is considered starvation, those 800 million people are the people that are eating under 1,600 calories a day, 1,800 calories a day, right? But if you increase that to like 2,000, 2,200 calories, if you increase that to 2,200, you're looking at more like 1.5 billion people, by the way. Because, I mean, you can live on 2,200 calories, but it's not a lot of food.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very similar to my way of abolishing crime, and that is to just legalize everything. So crime will not happen. There will be no crimes. So, yeah.
Well,
best way to go about it.
Like I said, I'm not saying there haven't been improvements. What I'm saying is that a lot of the times the World Bank just redefines its poverty statistics so that they can make it look like things are better than they actually are.
Far more hungry people than fat people.
Yeah.
Prostitutes have become universally more efficient. The peak usage of almost every raw material in Western countries per capita was around 79, and there have often been collapses between 3/4 and half per capita of raw materials because things are just more efficient now. Global carbon emissions have either peaked or will peak in the next 5 years since our engines, agriculture, etc. has just gotten more efficient. There are two conclusions we can draw from the examples above. The first is the standard of living will almost certainly rise by the end of the century. Modern projections, which I don't totally trust, say that by the end of the century, your average Bangladeshi will be as rich as your average Dutchman today. Revolutions in everything between biotech, nuclear energy, individual productivity, and stuff we don't even understand today will undoubtedly make the world a far richer place by the end of the century. However, in the short term, as we'll talk about soon, much of the world is close enough to crisis point that we may not have enough time to have a technological revolution to raise the standard of living fast enough to prevent it. Similarly, only the first world countries will be able to pull this off effectively and quickly, leaving much of the rest of the world in terrible shape. This will have large effects going forward. Another important thing to consider is that in a lot of ways we're hobbling our abilities to make innovations in the modern world. I've heard the argument that technological innovation has really slowed down compared to the 1860-1970 period. That's accurate, but it's a terrible frame of reference, since 1860-1970 was the greatest era of technological progress ever, and so comparing ourselves to it is like saying, oh, I'm so lame, I'm just Alexander, I'm not even close to Genghis Khan. However, there is a grain of truth in it. Practically all the technologies we have now were invented due to war, with the vast majority of hot, new technologies having been invented during World War II. The exceptions are GMOs, which were a real miracle in the internet, which was invented due to the Cold War. In general, private industry is amazing at making incremental advances, but massive breakthroughs technologies having been invented during World War II. The exceptions are GMOs, which were a real miracle in the internet, which was invented due to the Cold War. In general, private industry is amazing at making incremental advances, but massive breakthroughs are almost entirely from government research due to war. However, government investment in science has declined markedly since the Cold War stopped being competitive and there wasn't an external opponent.
Hold on. What do you say?
However, government investment in science has declined markedly since the Cold War stopped being competitive and there wasn't an external opponent. Government regulation has done tremendous ills to scientific research. Lots of industries like nuclear, genetic engineering, and even basic things like manufacturing are so regulated as to make putting research in them foolish, giving it how much smaller the payout would be through government regulation. And the sad thing is these industries have massive capability to benefit the world in countless ways.
They do. The sad part is that capitalism is, in fact, as a global system, laying the groundwork for all this technology. So I don't know why Bunnytooth sent this to me. I wonder, like, where he's going with this, but I am going to skip ahead again just because I don't have a lot of time left. I do want to go to the gym here soon, but let's see what.
Yeah,
let's see if he goes somewhere.
A midnight here as well. So.
Yeah.
Marriage suggestion.
And God forbid, for you, it's like 11 o'clock right now, isn't it?
Yeah. People around me are going to bed as well. I've been told off a couple of times, being too loud, but it's what it is.
Yeah, well, we'll close soon. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Greater hardship among the population. Similarly, declines in birth rate beneath the replacement level are also highly indicative of major crises for the same reason. We could use stuff like weight gains and declines in sleep quality as similar metrics of a collapse in well-being. I'm only looking at data for America here since that's what I have, but the trajectories for later marriage rates, buying houses later, less sleep, etc. are true in basically the entire world. An interesting thing is the standard of living itself is often less important than relative stress. The French and Russian revolutions, for example, both occurred after technological revolutions that rose the standard of living materially, but a peasant society in which people marry young and are able to establish themselves at a young age is far more. But
right.
Peasant society.
So I've heard of this hypothesis that both in the French Revolution, the real driving force behind the French Revolution was actually preceded by an increase in living standards. You know, and I don't know what evidence there is with the hypothesis. I would have to see it, but I'm telling you right now, man, people prior to both the French and October Revolution were not doing too hot. Like people don't revolt against their own governments if they're doing prosperously.
That is an incredibly stupid point. Also, in Russia, the Tsarists were actually, the Tsars were actively trying to seduce the Industrial Revolution because we didn't want to proletarianize the peasantry.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a major industrialization of Russia before the Bolsheviks.
No. People will point to, I mean, there was industrialization in Russia, but it's massively exaggerated. Like, the overwhelming majority of their GDP growth was driven by the rising agricultural prices on the global market, as well as increases in agricultural productivity in Russia. So, there's demand for wheat, and you're able to produce more wheat within your peasant farms and communes. So that's going to lead to a rise in GDP. And when your country's like 75% peasant, then, I mean, rationally, that makes sense that GDP is going to go up because you're able to sell more and for more per capita. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and further, the industrial workers in Russia who did exist were only there part-time. Like, they were season, according to the seasons, they were peasants during the summer, during the time when it was best for harvesting, and then they moved into the cities for the winter to produce in the factories. So they effectively had the worst of both ways. And the reason they went into the factories is because they weren't making enough money for themselves purely for agriculture. So they had the shitty conditions of the Industrial Revolution and the poverty that came with a decay in the agricultural industry.
Yeah.
So the idea that living standards increases the likelihood the population is just going to revolt against the thing that's making their lives better.
Yeah, by that logic, the whole first world should be revolutionary right now.
Yeah, I mean,
But that's not what we see. We see people are so complicit and docile in their own suffering. Like, because people have so much invested and tied into the current system that they don't want to, like, actually rock the boat or take risks on something new. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, the old phrase by Marx, workers of the world, unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. Well, people have more to lose than their chains at present, which is a big reason why nobody wants to, like, actually put the work in for a new system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
it's only, we need to have a major atrocity for anything to really change, and that might be, probably will be, the climate change.
Yeah.
Climate disaster.
So
around the corner.
Yeah, the thing is that even when climate change does happen, like the disaster does come to pass, it's overwhelmingly going to be people at and below the equator that are going to suffer because of it. People in the first world is going to be the last part of the world that starts to suffer from the fallout of climate change. I mean, first is going to come the mass migration, and then the famines, drought, terrible tsunamis and storms and all that other jazz. At the end of the day, one way or another, we are going to end up in a planned economy. Like, one way or another, we're going to end up under some kind of socialist system by the end of the century, I think. Just because you can't run civilization when the planet is fucked off of market economy. Like, you need to plan your inputs and outputs. Like, if resources are super scarce and the whole planet's ruined, like, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's there's no rationale for having a bunch of wealthy oligarchs that are hoarding all this money while everyone else is literally fucking starving.
It needs to be abolished, mate. It needs to be abolished.
Yeah, so one way or another, we're going to end up under socialism. Whether or not it looks more like your system or my system is, I mean, irrelevant at this point. But we are going to end up in some kind of socialism.
It's
coming sometime.
Yeah.
Able to establish themselves at a young age is far more stable than a more technologically developed one where young people feel incapable of reaching the goals of their expectations. Social media is almost certainly jacking this horrific process through the roof. Firstly, it creates a system in which people view the curated perfect versions of other people's lives while being stuck with all their insecurities and the sucky parts of their lives. Secondly, it creates comparisons between regions where that otherwise wouldn't happen, provoking envy and insecurity. How is life in the Baltimore ghetto manageable when you see videos of Beverly Hills every day? Or life in a shack in Cairo when you know about the Netherlands?
That's actually a reasonable point. Relative poverty has a profound effect on the human psyche. Like, just the knowing that there are people out there that have so much more than you, and there's an expectation that you got to have these nice things in order to be a respectable member of society. Like, relative poverty is hell on the human psyche. So, even in a future where, let's say, capitalism does eliminate extreme poverty, people's wages are up, there's no more hungry people. Even in such a situation, there will still be relative poverty, which again is hell on the human psyche.
And further, just because living standards are increasing doesn't justify the alienation of labor from its product. Like, for example, chattel slavery. The conditions of chattel slaves improved throughout from 1500s to the 1800s. But that doesn't justify slavery, a gradual increase in standards of living.
No, not at all.
The whole point of hierarchy and labor expropriation,
Go on.
Surplus extraction isn't justified just because under this system things are improving gradually. It's a fallacy of its own.
Yeah, it's still inherently exploitative. Exactly. I mean, even if living standards are improving, they would improve faster if people aren't having their surplus value extracted.
Yeah.
Anywho, let's go ahead and run this. Number of people living in urban, rural. Well, yeah, I mean, but that's kind of organic. I mean, what I'm just trying to figure out is what the fuck this dude's proposed solution is. Like where is he going with all this? Is he just saying society's coming to an end, there's nothing we can do about it? Does he want to go back to feudalism? Like, what's the solution?
Major issue here is that significant parts of the world's population live in recently urbanized megacities. People crowd into tenements and struggle to find work, slaving long hours in the confined and often live outside the law with little hope of getting a stable life to start a good family. Their societies move from peasant to urban in a generation, and so the culture is incapable of adapting that fast to people's needs. This stage of development, or basically early industrialization, begs for major wars and revolutions afterwards.
So wait, what did he just say?
First piece here is the United States live outside the law with little hope of getting a stable life to start a good family. Their societies move from peasant to urban in a generation, and so their culture is incapable of adapting that fast to people's needs. This stage of development, or basically early industrialization, begs for major wars and revolutions afterwards. The first piece here is the United States. Whether or not you like it, is the beating heart of the world's cultural, economic, military, and political system. The last 80 years of history has been the historic golden age, with the Pax Americana, a topic I've discussed in previous videos. However, we've gotten to the point where the Pax Americana no longer makes sense for the majority of Americans. The upper classes have done very well by having goods produced in places like China and having Mexicans mow their lawns, but both of these have depreciated indigenous Americans' wages. This has resulted in massive political polarization and internal strife. The way America solves its internal crisis is by becoming what amounts to mercantilist. The U.S. is an exporter of practically every raw material you can think of, whether oil, food, iron ore, etc., and by 2030 could become industrially self-sufficient. This would be pretty similar to 1920, in which the U.S. shut off immigration and put up high tariffs, which resulted in massive wage gains in an era of strong American nationalism when the U.S. went into World War II. All of this is stuff Trump has already done and Biden hasn't stopped, so we're seeing this process already in fruition. However, the U.S. is a quarter of the world's economy, and so having the U.S. pull out of the world system would have massive negative effects on much of the world's economy, creating a huge recession. This is sort of similar to how when China periodically went into isolationist phases in the Middle Ages, it precipitated massive economic and systemic collapses of the Eurasian economic system. Similarly, the U.S. will likely have a strategic retreat since both the Democrats and Republicans, with the exception of the Biden old-school Democrats who will die off in the next 5 years, have pseudo-isolationist agendas. The question is how far American power will retrench. The Middle East and Africa will almost certainly see massive power back.
Okay, get on with it.
This opens up the next issue.
Get on with it. Hold on.
Most of the Northern Hemisphere from Europe, borders, and regimes. We just can't freeze the world's politics in 1945 or 1994 between countries like Pakistan and India, or Saudi Arabia and Iran. The issue we run into with war...
Oh yeah, no, India and Pakistan are very likely going to be going to war soon. Probably within the next decade or two.
Yeah, I've seen some developments with that.
It's because there's not enough water. Like, we are going to be seeing scarcity of water, like water shortages in the future, because we have a growing population, which means growing demand for fresh water, and the water that we do have is wasted. Like, we squander it on unsustainable agricultural practices, as well as taking 45-minute showers. There's like no efficiency in mind when it comes to like how we utilize our water. We could create again, this is an issue. Like, the answer is simpler than you think. The answer really is simpler to a lot of these problems than you think. Like desalinization plants. We could build desalinization plants. We could improve our recycling protocols with our water. We could, maybe not manufacture a shit ton of meat. Cattle ranching, that uses a shit ton of water. Focus on like lab-grown meat. There have been developments there. So yeah.
I've actually recently gone vegan, so
Oh.
I'm not to blame for that. Hands up, I am to blame for a lot of it, but still.
You've got more self-control than I do. If there's one thing that I'm going to have a very difficult time, if I were to ever try to go vegetarian or vegan again, the one thing I would struggle most with is steak. I'm not a big steak eater, but the notion of never being able to eat steak again would depress me.
Have you tried Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat?
Yeah, I mean, I've had Impossible Burgers before. They're pretty good, but I don't know. Until the day comes where they can make a identical vegan T-bone steak, I don't.
Yeah, and that's sort of the issue, isn't it? Really,
the
lack of a better alternative.
I mean, to be fair, I do want to eat like a pseudo-vegetarian, like have a few days during the week where I am vegan. I mean, I know it's not much, but like, let's say like 1 or 2 vegan days out of the week and a couple vegetarian days. I don't know. I feel like that would make a lot of difference too.
Yeah, it does. It does. Like just halving the amount of meat someone eats has a massive, quite a large impact on the animal agriculture itself. We digress.
Yeah. Anyways, does he get to is there a point? Jesus.
I wish this was timestamped.
With the greater poverty and chaos that will come out of this, it's inevitable. This is added to a situation in which we're clearing.
So is this like 33 minutes of doomer?
Well, my prediction was correct then. If so.
I don't know when this dam breaks, but it will. With the greater poverty and chaos that will come out of this, it's inevitable. This is added to a situation in which we're clearing lots of virgin forest in the third world, which makes the chances of running into some uncontacted disease way higher. This is how most pandemics in history have started. A similar situation is that with all this conflict going on, the chances that someone drops some sort of biological disease weapon designed to be difficult to defeat seems reasonably high. The nasty truth is that for most of history, disease was the force that balanced out human numbers. People didn't starve since disease kept the population down. The massive population growth of the 20th and 19th centuries was due to the more effective ways of dealing with disease. The sheer amounts of lives things like malaria prevention or the polio vaccine have saved is insane, often numbering in the hundreds of millions or above a billion. A twisted way of looking at this would tell you that a world with more disease would appear to us as a utopia for those who survived. A world with the same degree of productivity but half the population would be a world where people wouldn't work very hard, but would be fabulously rich by our standards. It would be a world where most people would live a world where automated...
Okay. So, eugenics, population degrowth. Is that what he's saying? Let me repeat this.
The population growth of the 20th and 19th centuries was due to the more effective ways of dealing with disease. The sheer amounts of lives things like malaria prevention or the polio vaccine have saved is insane, often numbering in the hundreds of millions or above a billion. A twisted way of looking at this would tell you that a world with more disease would appear to us as a utopia for those who survived. A world with the same degree of productivity but half the population would be a world where people wouldn't work very hard, but would be fabulously rich by our standards. It would be a world where most people would live like aristocrats. A world where automated robots would do menial stuff, and a world surrounded by incredible natural beauty with cities built like parks. It would also be a handy solution to our demographic problems. If the elderly died at a higher rate due to disease, people would have more kids in order to make the chances of their genes.
Okay, so genocide. He was building up the last 27 minutes and 30 seconds to basically advocate for a very Malthusian solution. You know what's so fucked up about this solution, though, right? Like, the issue is, like, the top 15% of the population are the ones using the majority of the resources. Like, if you just took the first world, we're the ones using the majority of the resources at a much faster rate than everybody else. So, like, and not to mention,
they're the ones flying the private jets everywhere.
Then there's the racist implications of this. There are some very racist implications you can draw from such a video. Let me explain what I mean. So who has the most people? It's India and China. So what? We're gonna force all the Indians and the Chinese and the non-white people to fucking depopulate? Is that what we're gonna do? That's fucked up, dude. I feel like there's a very racist component to this kind of mindset too. Like, and you better watch out, guys, because this is the kind of psychology you're going to start to see, is the kind of eco-fascism. There's too many people, and we got to take out all the non-white people, basically. This is like the straight up the seeds for fucking eco-fascism. I'm telling you.
Do you know what a fantastic way is of like reducing birth rates, reducing poverty? Because it turns out when people are less impoverished, they tend to be less likely to reproduce at the extent that some impoverished families do. So, for example, the middle class are far less likely to have more than 2 kids than a very working class family, for example. So let's just redistribute wealth.
Yeah, it's
Just
the game. Well, we have to get away from the growth ethic. The game has to change the way we look at the game, as in rather than. Reducing poverty definitely does, because you're introducing contraception as well as medical technology, which lengthens life expectancy to the point to where there's less need for kids. Also, reducing infant mortality. One of the reasons why people in third world countries have so many more kids is because half of them are dead before they reach the age of 30. So you also have to keep that in mind. All in all, I've seen the population is going to equalize. We're going to reach a point to where we don't have population growth is going to level out. By the end of the century, we're going to peak at about 10 to 11 billion people. And we're not really going to get much bigger than that over the centuries. That's pretty much when the whole world's modernized. But the other thing is, like I said, we have a finite planet with finite resources. The game does not need to be about infinite growth and consumption. It should be about recycling, meeting needs in a sustainable manner, providing a good standard of living, stretching your resources as far as you possibly can to fulfill as much utility as you possibly can. This is the direction that we need to go. You know, the direction of, like I said, the Zeitgeist movies. That's basically where we need to head to, like resource-based economy and all that jazz. I'm all about that shit, man.
Ooh, that sounds like a trading scheme.
Yeah, dude. Look into. I mean, sure, there'd still be trade, but look into the Zeitgeist movies, guys. If you guys want like a vision of what my end game is, what I want, future society to ultimately be, look up like the Venus Project or like the Jacques Fresco or like the Zeitgeist movies, because that's the circular cities that are integrated with the ecosystem, advanced, automated, highly automated cities where people only need to work a few hours a week and people are free to live whatever lives they want. That's what I want. I want Jacques Fresco's donut cities.
There we go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sorry for running my mouth. Anyways.
No worries.
And surviving higher. This would result in a younger creative population. Similarly, it would be a major help for climate change. The global climate didn't get much warmer until the 1990s, when it was really just the West polluting. It started to really get warmer as China industrialized with coal, but remained within standard fluctuations of what was normal around 2010, when places like India or Africa started to use more coal. People often lambast earlier generations for not doing more about climate change, but
correlation does not equal causation. There are more cars on the road, more people on the road than ever before as well. So I feel like this is kind of this chart, because I feel like China modernizing, because they use more coal, they output more CO2, but on a per capita basis, they don't look. Hold on, carbon footprint per capita by country. Watch this. If you actually look at this chart, you'll find that China is nowhere near on the top of the list. It's actually individually. These are look at that shit, man. China's all the way down here. They're not even in the top 10. So, what do you say about that?
I
don't know.
Canada, US, Russia, Japan. Yeah.
But the truth is that we really didn't get definitive evidence that was human-driven until around 2010. However, it does mean that we could largely remain in a carbon-based economy with greater efficiency in procedures with half the population. Climate change is a deeply complex and emotional topic.
I can't believe it. He's really advocating genocide. I can't believe that's his big. I knew it. I called this at the start of the video, bro. Either he's going to propose communism, or he's going to propose a fucking system that's absolutely batshit insane. And he basically wants to Thanos snap half the goddamn population.
Yeah. So I was wrong. He's not a doomer. He's just a fucking fascist.
It's a crazy, crazy idea.
Yeah, well,
This
is
is
what it is.
people really not knowing what they're talking about. Climate models are so unpredictable, and that we really don't know what the climate will look like 25 to 50 years out. We don't know which areas will get warmer or colder, or drier or wetter, etc. Scientists are generally incentivized to make climate change look as bad as possible, since that's how they get more funding. This isn't
Bullshit. Fuck you. The climate scientists get paid like 50 to 60 grand a year if they're lucky. But if you deny climate change and you're a fucking scientist or mouthpiece that like denies it or tries to downplay it or give optimistic projections, you will make literally millions of dollars. Like, guys, what makes more sense? Piss poor, underfunded climate scientists are saying, yeah, climate change is real and it's largely man-made, or the corporations that are pumping billions of dollars into climate propaganda, anti-climate propaganda, and have literally known about climate change for decades, but have paid to have that information suppressed. Like, we've known about climate change since the 70s, and there's like a report they actively went out of the way to fucking suppress that information from coming out. You know, yeah, this guy's full of shit.
And how many views has this got? 500.
Yeah, I now see why my friends on Discord wanted me to watch this. So yeah, no, the logical conclusion's genocide. Let's see what else he's got.
isn't to say climate change isn't an issue. It is, and it's a major one at that. But we normally get fed the worst-case scenarios in the media. In general, things as of now look better than most people would think. Climate emissions have likely already peaked, and China's switching from coal to other based economy is projected to be the greatest event in history for improving the climate. Similarly, nuclear...
Even if China switches to coal, we're still pumping out that CO2. And even if we were to... Because CO2 doesn't just go away. It stays and lingers in our atmosphere. So even if we were to cut carbon emissions to zero tomorrow, the planet will still be permanently hotter, and it would actually continue to get hotter because there's like a lag effect associated with it as well. So no, there's like, this is where these climate change denying assholes are now. They no longer can deny the science. They can't deny it anymore. So they're like, oh, well, it's not as bad, so we shouldn't worry about it. Or like, oh no, we just gotta kill half the population, then we'll be good.
Yeah, but if views like this start to permeate, then the COVID restrictions will begin to look like a wet fart.
Yeah.
Compared to what states will be willing to do to their own populations as in response to the climate disaster that's coming up. So.
Oh yeah. This is very absurd to me, but let's go ahead and keep playing. So yeah, no, he's just downplaying climate change. Wonderful.
And renewable energies are both seeing improvements now. The world crisis could either have positive or negative effects in the climate. A very worrying possibility would be that China or India face issues in the global supply chain and thus stay on coal, which would be terrible for the global...
Fuck you! Look, he doesn't even have any works cited. He has Twitter, my takeoff. He's got all his channel links, dude. You want to know what I fucking do every time I make a video essay, guys? I include works cited with page numbers if need be. Anytime someone posts one of these videos where there's no works cited and they're just throwing and cramming as much information in as possible, like this guy, he doesn't have works cited, so yeah, fuck him.
Climate. The flip side of this collapse is the possibility that the global supply chain could collapse and result in places like India, East Asia, or Europe switching to nuclear in order to have a more secure energy source.
All right, you know what? It's 6:30. I'm through with this guy, so...
Fair enough.
Oh, man. I was standing up most of the time, so... Anyways.
It is what it is. So, before we head off, I'm just going to give my bit of the news. And my headline is Leeds United are still shit. And Manchester United have officially won the football. But that's just the end of it. China's
done this in part with the one-child policy. Yeah, and they've fucked their population demographic because of it. China now has 117 men per every 100 women. And there's like bride nappings, like literal bride nappings go on where like Chinese wives are sold and then trafficked by people looking for brides in China. Or they're They're importing. They're having mail order brides from like Vietnam and like South Korea too. It's another thing they do. But they have a shortage of women in China now because they actually favored the boys over the girls disproportionately. But there's an issue with that because now China is going to experience like population collapse within the next few decades because if there's not enough men, like if the replacement rate, because if you have a shortage of women, then the replacement rate for your population on top of the one child policy is going to be super low. So you're just going to have this huge gap between the young and the old as time goes on. And it's going to cause their population to shrink, you know, because they basically lost a generation. I think he's asleep, but you know what? I'm going to go and let you go, man.
All right.
Yeah, ThoughtBat's asleep, guys. I'm sorry.
I'm not asleep. I'm here.
Okay, well. So I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Yeah, check out ThoughtBat's channel. He has a channel, same as his namesake. He makes his anarchist content. You might find some interesting stuff there. You're welcome to come back anytime you want, bro. I do these streams like once a week.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me, man.
Right.
I appreciate it. Cheers.
Yeah,
I'll see you in the next one, mate. There we go.
you guys.